The wind in Dry Creek did not blow so much as it scoured. It came down from the high, flat mesas like a judgment, stripping the paint from the storefronts and driving the grit deep into the skin of anyone foolish enough to linger outside. It was a town built on a mistake, a struggling settlement clinging to the edge of a thin, brown river that looked more like a scar than a water source. The earth here was cracked into a mosaic of thirsty clay, and the sky above felt too large, an indifferent expanse of blue iron that offered no shelter and no pity. Clara Hale sat by the window of the general store, her head bent over a bolt of calico. The needle in her hand moved with a rhythm that was almost mechanical, a small, silver flash against the dull fabric. Stitch, pull, knot, stitch, pull, knot. It was 1878, and for 2 years, this had been her life. She was the widow Hale, the seamstress, the woman who had survived the fire that took everything else. She bit the thread, the taste of cotton dry on her tongue. Through the dusty glass of the window, she watched the town of Dry Creek struggle through another Tuesday. Men walked with their heads down against the wind, hats pulled low. A wagon creaked past, its wheels groaning under a load of supplies for one of the outlying ranches. Clara kept to herself. She had learned that silence was a shield. When she walked the boardwalks, she offered polite, tight smiles that discouraged conversation. She knew what they said about her. She felt the weight of their pity and their judgment every time she entered a room. To the women of the town, she was a tragedy to be whispered about over tea, a cautionary tale of what happened when luck ran dry. To the men, she was a curiosity, a young woman left alone, damaged goods that no one quite knew how to approach. She finished the hem and folded the dress, smoothing the fabric with hands that were rougher than a seamstress's hands should be. They were hands that remembered the feel of a plow handle and the coarse mane of a horse. Memories from a life that had burned to ash. Voices drifted from the front of the store, carrying over the stacks of flour sacks and tinned peaches. It was Mrs. Gable, the store owner's wife, talking to a customer. Clara did not mean to listen, but the name caught her ear like a burr. Barrett Cole. He bought out the Miller place yesterday, Mrs. Gable was saying, her voice lowered to a conspiratorial hum. Got it for a song. I hear Miller finally gave up fighting the drought. Or maybe he just got tired of the accidents. Clara froze. Her hand hovered over the folded calico. Accidents. The word echoed in the hollow space inside her chest. It was the same word Sheriff Amos Finch had used 2 years ago. An accident. Clara. A tipped lantern. A spark from the stove. These things happen in a wind like this. She remembered the heat. It was not a memory she visited willingly, but it came unbidden. A flash of orange and the sound of roaring wind that was not wind at all. She remembered the way the roof had groaned before it collapsed. She remembered screaming for Thomas, for Henry, until her throat was raw and bleeding. She remembered the morning after, standing in the smoking ruins. She had found Henry's tin soldier half buried in a drift of gray ash. The paint had bubbled off, leaving it black and twisted. Nearby, the old oak tree stood like a charred skeleton, burned on one side but refusing to fall, a silent witness to the night her world ended. Clara stood up abruptly, the chair scraping loud against the floorboards. The voices at the front of the store stopped. She picked up her shawl and wrapped it tight around her shoulders. Though the air inside was still, she needed to leave. She needed to breathe. She walked out the back door and up the narrow wooden stairs to the room she rented above the store. It was a small space, neat and sparse. A bed, a wash basin, a trunk. It was a place to sleep, not a home. Home was a blackened foundation 5 miles out of town where the ghosts of her husband and 5-year-old son still seemed to walk in the moonlight. Clara sat on the edge of the bed and pressed her palms against her eyes. The gossip about Barrett Cole buying the Miller place sat heavy in her stomach. Barrett Cole, with his polished boots and his calculated smile, now owned half the grazing land around Dry Creek. He was a man who expanded his empire like a stain spreading across a map. She had always suspected. The thought was a dangerous thing, a sharp stone she carried in her pocket. She had suspected that the fire was not an accident. Thomas had refused to sell to Barrett 3 times in the month before he died, but suspicion was not proof, and a widow with nothing but a scorched patch of dirt had no voice against a man who dined with the governor. The sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in bruises of purple and red. The wind howls picked up, rattling the window pane in its frame. It was a lonely sound. Clara stood up. She could not stay in this small room tonight. The walls felt like they were closing in. She needed to check on Daisy. Daisy was a mare, a bay with a white star on her forehead, the only living thing besides Clara that had survived the fire. Clara boarded her at the livery stable at the edge of town, paying for her keep with money she could barely spare from her sewing. Daisy was an extravagance, a foolish drain on her resources, but Clara would go hungry before she let the horse go. Daisy was the last thread connecting her to Thomas. She pulled her shawl tighter and stepped out into the gathering dark. The wind hit her instantly, smelling of sagebrush and dry dust. The street was mostly empty. The saloon piano tinkled a tinny melody in the distance, swallowed by the gusting air. Clara walked with her head down, fighting the current, her boots crunching on the gravel. Sheriff Amos Finch was standing on the porch of his office, smoking a pipe. He was a heavy man. His shoulders slumped as if the badge on his chest weighed 50 pounds. He touched the brim of his hat as she passed. "Evening, Mrs. Hale," he said. "Evening, Sheriff." Clara replied, not stopping. She did not hate Amos Finch, but she could not look at him without remembering his weary voice telling her to accept the tragedy and move on. He was a decent man who had grown too tired to be a brave one. She reached the livery stable at the far end of town. It was a large, drafty barn built of rough-hewn timber, smelling of sweet hay and manure. A lantern hung by the door, swinging wildly in the wind, casting jumping shadows against the wood. Clara slipped inside, sliding the heavy door shut behind her to cut off the gale. The sudden silence was a relief. The air here was warm and smelled of life. Horses shifted in their stalls, blowing soft breaths. Daisy was in the third stall on the left. The mare nickered low in her throat as Clara approached. "Hey there, girl," Clara whispered, resting her forehead against the horse's velvety nose. "You are restless tonight." The wind battered the walls of the stable, making the timbers creak. Daisy stamped a hoof, her ears flickering back. Animals knew when the weather turned mean. They felt the pressure in the air. Clara stroked the mare's neck, finding comfort in the solid warmth of the animal. For a moment, she let herself pretend. If she closed her eyes, she could be back in the barn at the ranch, waiting for Thomas to come in from the cold, hearing Henry laughing as he chased the barn cats. But when she opened her eyes, she was alone in a rented stall, and the wind outside sounded like a woman screaming. 2 miles outside of Dry Creek, the plain stretched out into an endless, shadowy void. Eli Morin rode slowly, letting his gelding pick its way through the scrub brush. He was a man who looked like he had been carved out of the landscape itself, lean, hard, and weathered. His hat was pulled low, the brim ragged, shadowing a face that had seen too much sun and too little kindness. He adjusted his collar, pulling it high against the stinging wind. He wore a glove on his left hand, but his right hand was bare, and even in the dim starlight, the scars were visible. They twisted up from his knuckles, a map of shiny, puckered flesh that disappeared up his sleeve and climbed the side of his neck, ending just below his jawline. Pain was a constant companion to Eli, a dull ache in his joints when the cold set in, a sharp pull in the scar tissue when he moved too fast. He had learned to live with it, just as he had learned to live with the silence. He was just passing through. That was what he told himself. He was heading west, toward the territories, toward anywhere that wasn't here. He had spent the last 5 years drifting, working cattle drives, breaking horses, moving on before anyone asked too many questions about where he came from or how he got his burns. He had ridden with bad men once. He carried that knowledge like a stone in his gut. He had done things, and he had watched things happen, and the guilt of it had hollowed him out until he felt more like a husk than a man. Dry Creek was just a cluster of lights in the distance, a place to water his horse and maybe buy a hot meal before moving on. He had no business there. Eli crested a low rise and reined in his horse. He narrowed his eyes, looking toward the town. There was a light at the edge of the settlement that didn't look right. It was too bright, too orange. At first, he thought it might be the last of the sunset reflecting off the dust, but the sun had been down for an hour. The wind shifted, carrying a scent that made Eli's stomach turn over. Smoke. Not the cozy smell of a wood stove, but the acrid, choking smell of burning structure. Pine tar and panic. The glow intensified, shooting up a pillar of sparks that swirled madly in the gale. It was a fire, and with this wind behind it, it would eat whatever it touched in minutes. Eli felt the old fear rise up, the memory of heat on his skin. But he shoved it down. He spurred his horse forward. The animal bolted, sensing the urgency, and they thundered down the slope toward the town. He told himself he was a fool. He should turn around. He should ride wide and keep going. Fire was bad luck. Fire was his past coming to find him. But he could not turn away. Inside the livery stable, the world had turned into a nightmare. It had happened so fast. One moment, the lantern by the door had been swinging in the draft. The next, a gust had torn the door from its latch, slamming it against the wall. The lantern shattered. Oil splashed across the dry straw scattered on the floor. The flame caught with a whoosh that sounded like a heavy intake of breath. Clara stood frozen. The fire raced up the wooden post, feeding on the dry timber like a starving beast. The hayloft above caught instantly. Fire. The smell hit her, and she was no longer in the livery stable. She was back in the ranch house. The ceiling was falling. Thomas was shouting. The heat was pressing against her eyeballs, drying the moisture from her throat. Daisy screamed, a high, terrifying sound that shattered Clara's paralysis. The mare reared in the stall, eyes rolling white with terror, hooves battering the wood. The other horses were panicking, kicking and screaming. Clara scrambled to the stall door. She had to get Daisy out. She fumbled with the latch, her fingers numb and shaking. The smoke was already thick, rolling down from the ceiling in black, oily waves. It stung her eyes and filled her mouth with the taste of copper. She got the stall door open. Daisy lunged forward, but the lead rope was still tied to the ring on the wall. The horse hit the end of the rope and jerked back, almost trampling Clara. Easy. Clara coughed, waving her hand to clear the smoke. Easy, girl. She reached for the knot, but the rope was pulled tight by the horse's panic. She couldn't loosen it. The fire was roaring now, the sound deafening, drowning out the wind outside. A beam from the loft above cracked with the sound of a gunshot and swung down, dangling by a strip of iron, raining sparks onto the aisle. Clara clawed at the knot. Her fingernails broke. "Leave it," a voice in her head screamed. "Run!" But she could not lose this. Not again. If she lost Daisy, she lost the last living piece of Henry, who had loved to be held up to stroke the horse's nose. The heat was blistering. Clara's dress felt hot against her legs. She was coughing violently, doubling over. The smoke was a physical weight, pressing her down. She was going to die here. The realization was cold and sharp. She was going to burn, just like they did. Suddenly, the main doors burst open. A figure silhouetted against the night sky charged in. A man. He had a bandana tied over his nose and mouth, his hat pulled low. He didn't hesitate. He moved with a strange, frantic purpose. He ran down the aisle, dodging the falling sparks. He saw Clara struggling with the mare. "Get back!" he roared. His voice was rough, choked with smoke. He didn't wait for her to obey. He shoved past her. Producing a knife from his belt in one fluid motion, he slashed the rope. Daisy, suddenly free, bolted. She knocked the man sideways, scrambling for the open door, her hooves striking sparks on the stone floor. She disappeared into the night. The man scrambled up. He grabbed Clara's arm. His grip was like iron. "Move!" he shouted. Clara stumbled. Her legs felt like water. The terror was a roar in her ears, louder than the fire. She looked up at the loft. The hay was an inferno. "I can't," she whispered. The man cursed. He didn't argue. He wrapped an arm around her waist and hauled her off her feet, dragging her toward the door. A massive beam from the roof groaned and gave way directly above them. "Look out!" Clara screamed. The man didn't look up. He threw his weight against her, shoving her forward and shielding her body with his own. He raised his right arm, the scarred one, to deflect the blow. The timber crashed down, glancing off his shoulder and slamming into the ground with a shower of embers. The man grunted, a sound of pure agony, but he didn't go down. He gritted his teeth. His eyes squeezed shut for a second. Then he shoved her again. "Go!" They tumbled out of the stable doors and into the dirt of the street just as the roof began to collapse inward. The cold air hit Clara like a slap. She fell to her hands and knees in the dust, retching, gasping for air that didn't taste like death. The wind whipped her hair across her face. She was shaking so hard her teeth rattled. She looked up. The stranger was kneeling a few feet away, clutching his shoulder. He pulled the bandana down from his face. He was coughing, spitting black saliva into the dirt. Clara stared at him. The firelight from the burning barn illuminated his face. She saw the scars on his neck, angry and red in the heat. She saw the way his hand trembled as he checked his shoulder. He looked at her. His eyes were dark, shadowed, but there was a terrifying intensity in them. "Are you hurt?" he rasped. Clara couldn't answer. She was still trapped in the memory. The heat was still on her skin. She reached out, her hand trembling, clutching at the sleeve of his dusted coat. She gripped the fabric until her knuckles turned white. "Please," she whispered, the words tearing out of her throat. He froze, looking at her hand on his arm. "Please don't leave me burning," she begged. She wasn't talking about the stable. She was talking about the emptiness, the silence of her room, the grave of her family, the endless, scorching grief that she woke up to every morning. She was begging him not to leave her in the hell she had been living in for 2 years. Eli looked into her eyes. He saw the reflection of the flames, but he also saw a desperation that matched his own secret guilt. He saw a woman who was already ash, trying to hold her shape in the wind. He covered her hand with his own. His skin was rough, calloused, and scarred. "I won't," he said. His voice was low, a promise made to the dirt and the dark. "I won't leave you." The town arrived too late. They came running with buckets, shouting, forming a line from the horse trough. But the wind had already claimed the stable. The structure was a skeleton of orange light against the black sky. Men shouted orders that were swallowed by the gale. Sheriff Finch was there, directing the bucket brigade to wet down the roofs of the nearby buildings to prevent the sparks from spreading. Clara sat on a crate outside the general store, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She was covered in soot, her face streaked with gray. She watched the fire die down, her eyes hollow. Eli stood near her, leaning against a hitching post. He had moved his horse away from the noise but had returned to stand guard. He kept his head down, his hat shadowing his face. He held his injured arm stiffly against his side. The townsfolk cast quick, suspicious glances at him. He was a stranger, a drifter, and in Dry Creek, trouble always blew in with drifters. A shiny black buggy pulled up to the edge of the crowd. Barrett Cole stepped out. He was a tall man, dressed in a fine wool suit that seemed impervious to the dust. He watched the burning stable with a calm, detached expression, like a man assessing a column of figures in a ledger. "A terrible shame," Barrett said, his voice carrying easily over the dying roar of the fire. He walked over to the stable owner, a man named Henderson, who was watching his livelihood turn to smoke. "I will cover the damages, Mr. Henderson," Barrett said, reaching into his pocket. "We cannot have honest businessmen suffering because of carelessness." He turned his gaze toward Eli. It was a cold, measuring look, or perhaps something worse than carelessness. Barrett added softly, "It is a dangerous time to be welcoming strangers into our midst. You never know what kind of spark a man brings with him." The crowd murmured. The suspicion in the air tightened. Eyes turned to Eli, hard. unfriendly eyes. "He's right," a man in the back muttered. "Stable don't just catch fire." Eli didn't move. He was used to this look. He tightened his jaw and prepared to mount his horse and leave. It was what he always did. No, the word was quiet, but it cut through the murmurs. Clara stood up. The blanket fell from her shoulders. She looked small and frail, covered in ash, but her chin was lifted. "He saved me," Clara said, her voice gaining strength. "The beam fell. The door was blocked. He came in for me. He saved the mare." She looked directly at Barrett Cole. For the first time in 2 years, she did not look down. "He pulled me out of the fire. Mr. Cole. If he hadn't been there, I would be dead." Barrett's smile didn't waver, but his eyes narrowed slightly. He tipped his hat to her. "Mrs. Hale, you are distraught. We are all relieved you are safe, of course. But one must wonder what a drifter was doing lurking so close to the stables in the dark." "He was riding through," Clara said sharply. Sheriff Finch stepped forward, wiping soot from his forehead with a handkerchief. He looked between Barrett and Eli, looking tired. "Step forward, son," the sheriff said to Eli. Eli pushed off the post and walked into the circle of lantern light. He moved with a slight limp. "Name?" Finch asked. "Eli Moran." "What brings you to Dry Creek?" "Mr. Moran." Eli's eyes flicked to Clara, then back to the sheriff. "Looking for work. Heading west. Just passing through." Finch studied him. He looked at the burn scars on Eli's neck, illuminated by the dying fire. He looked at the way Clara Hale was standing, leaning toward the stranger as if he were a windbreak. "Well," Finch said slowly, "you did a good deed tonight, but we don't have much work for drifters here. Move on when you are rested." "I will," Eli said. Barrett Cole watched the exchange, his face unreadable. He turned to Clara. "And you, my dear, you have lost your stable for the horse. If you need a place for the animal, my ranch has ample stalls. I would be happy to take the burden off your hands." "For a fair price?" "Of course." Clara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the wind. He wanted Daisy, just like he wanted the land, just like he wanted everything. "No," she said. "Thank you. I will manage." Barrett shrugged. A microscopic motion. "As you wish." He turned and walked back to his buggy, the crowd parting for him like the Red Sea. The fire hissed as the last of the roof collapsed. The bucket brigade began to disperse, the excitement fading into the dull fatigue of cleanup. Clara turned to Eli. He was watching her. "Thank you," she said. He nodded. "You defended me. You didn't have to. You saved my life," she said. She looked around. The stable was a smoldering ruin. Daisy was standing nervously by the water trough where someone had caught her. Shivering, "I have nowhere to put her," Clara said, her voice trembling slightly. "The livery is gone. I live in a room above the store. I cannot keep a horse in the street." Eli looked at the horse, then at the vast, dark emptiness of the plains beyond the town. "You got land?" he asked. Clara hesitated. I have the old place, 5 miles out. The house is gone, but the corral is still half standing. The barn collapsed, but there is a lean-to that survived. It's shelter," Eli said. "Yes, but I cannot take her there alone tonight. Not in this wind, not after the fire." She couldn't say it, but the fear was plain on her face. She was terrified to go back to the burnt place in the dark, with the smell of smoke still clinging to her clothes. Eli looked at his horse, then at the road leading out of town. He should leave. He should ride west until Dry Creek was a bad memory. But he heard the echo of her voice. "Please don't leave me burning." "I'll help you," he said quietly. Clara looked at him, startled. "You don't have to, I know, but I'm going that way." It was a lie. He wasn't going that way. But he walked over to Daisy and took the lead rope. He stroked the mare's neck, calming her. "Mount up," he told Clara. "You can ride your mare. I'll ride alongside." Clara hesitated for a second, watching him. She saw the weary set of his shoulders, the way he favored his right side. She felt a prickle of unease. He was a stranger, a man with scars and secrets who rode out of the dark. But she also remembered the way he had shielded her from the falling beam. She nodded. She mounted Daisy. The horse was skittish but calm under her hand. Eli mounted his gelding. Together, they turned away from the dying light of the town and the prying eyes of the neighbors. They rode past the saloon, past the sheriff's office, and out into the open prairie. The wind howled around them, kicking up dust that ghosted around the horses' legs. The smell of smoke began to fade, replaced by the scent of cold earth and sage. They were two silhouettes moving through the dark, heading toward a ruin, bound together by the flames they had just escaped and the fires that were still burning inside them. Dawn broke over the high plains not with a gentle light, but with a harsh, revealing glare that stripped away the mercy of the shadows. As the sun crested the flat horizon, it painted the world in shades of pale gold and bruised purple, illuminating the destination that Clara Hale had been dreading for 2 years. They sat on their horses at the edge of the property line. Before them lay the remains of the Hale Ranch. It was a graveyard of ambition and love. The farmhouse, once painted a cheerful white that Thomas had been so proud of, was now nothing more than a jagged, blackened foundation. The chimney stood alone, a finger of brick pointing accusingly at the indifferent sky. The barn had collapsed inward, its roof beams looking like the ribs of some enormous, prehistoric animal that had died fighting the earth. Patches of stubborn, yellow grass grew up between the scorched posts, feeding on the ash. The wind whistled through the gaps in the ruins, a low, mournful sound that raised the hair on Clara's arms. She sat rigid on Daisy, her knuckles white on the reins. It looked smaller than she remembered. Tragedy had a way of shrinking things, reducing a life that had felt vast and full into a pile of debris that could be crossed in 20 paces. Eli Moran sat silently beside her. He did not speak, nor did he look away. He surveyed the land with the eyes of a man who knew how to read destruction. He saw the way the fire had moved, the direction of the wind that night, the thoroughness of the devastation. It was a Wednesday. Clara said. Her voice was thin, barely audible over the wind. She did not look at Eli. She stared at the empty space where the front door had been. It was a Wednesday night. Thomas had been up late mending a harness. Henry was asleep in the loft. She took a breath that shuddered in her chest. Everyone said it was the stove. The sheriff, the fire marshal, the neighbors. They said I must have left a damper open, or a log rolled out. They said it was an accident born of carelessness. Eli shifted in his saddle, the leather creaking. And you? What do you say? Clara turned her head slowly to look at him. Her eyes were dry, but they held a haunted depth that made Eli's chest ache. I smell kerosene, Mr. Moran, in my nightmares. I smell it, and I smelled it that night, too, before the smoke, before the heat. I smelled coal oil on the back porch, where we never kept any. Eli looked back at the ruins. His jaw tightened until the muscle jumped. He knew that smell. He knew the tactic. It was a coward's weapon, used by men who wanted land but did not have the courage to fight for it in the daylight. You wait for a dry night, when the wind is blowing hard out of the north. You splash the oil on the windward side. You light a single match and ride away, letting the prairie do your dirty work. He had ridden with men who did such things. The memory was a sour taste in his mouth. He had stood by while torches were thrown, telling himself he was just a hired hand, just following orders. He had not thrown the torch that night 5 years ago in Wyoming, but he hadn't stopped it either. Not until it was too late. Shame, cold and heavy, settled in his gut. He looked at the woman beside him, her posture rigid with the grief he had helped inflict on others, and he felt like a monster standing on holy ground. Why stay? Eli asked, his voice rougher than he intended. Why keep this? Because he wants it, Clara said. Who? Barrett Cole. She gestured to the blackened land. The day after the funeral, he came to me. He stood right there, while the embers were still smoking. He offered to buy the deed. He said he wanted to take the burden off my hands. He offered me pennies on the dollar. He said a woman alone couldn't manage a burnt-out claim. And you told him no. I told him to get off my land before I fetched my husband's rifle. Clara said, "It was the only time I have ever threatened a man." She looked back at the ruins. "They think I am foolish. The whole town. They think I am a stubborn, tragic widow holding on to a graveyard. But this is all I have left of them. If I sell it to him, it vanishes. He will run his cattle over it and erase the spot where my son slept." Eli looked at the scar on his hand, the twisted flesh that marked his own failure. He understood stubbornness. He understood holding on to pain because it was the only thing that felt real. "Let's get the horse settled," he said. He dismounted, his boots kicking up small clouds of dust. He didn't offer any platitudes. He didn't tell her she was brave. He simply started to work. And, for Clara, that was a kindness greater than any prayer. The sun climbed higher, turning the high plains into an anvil under a hammer of heat. The wind did not stop. It only grew hotter, sucking the moisture from their skin. They worked in silence. The corral was in shambles, the rails splintered and rotting, but the posts were deep-set cedar and had survived the flames. Eli found a stack of weather-beaten boards near the collapsed barn, lumber that Thomas must have intended for a project he never got to start. Eli worked with a quiet, efficient competence that Clara found mesmerizing to watch. He moved deliberately. He did not waste energy. He tested the weight of a board, checked the grain, and drove nails with steady, rhythmic strikes of a hammer he had found in the debris. Clara worked beside him. She was not a woman who shied away from labor. She hauled the lighter boards, cleared the tumbleweeds that had piled up against the fence line, and mixed a slurry of mud and straw to patch the gaps in the windbreak. Her hands, usually accustomed to the fine needlework of a seamstress, grew red and abraded. Dust coated her throat, making her cough. Sweat trickled down her back, soaking her heavy dress. But the physical exertion was a relief. It grounded her. It demanded her attention, forcing the memories of the fire to the back of her mind. At midday, they took a break in the shadow of the lean-to. Eli took a canteen from his saddlebag and offered it to her first. Clara drank deeply, the tepid water tasting like life itself. She handed it back to him, watching as he drank. He had removed his left glove to work, and for the first time in the daylight, she saw the full extent of his scars. They were brutal marks. The skin on the back of his hand and up his wrist was shiny and tight, a mottled map of pink and white tissue where the fire had melted the flesh. It looked painful, even now, years later. Eli lowered the canteen and caught her staring. He didn't pull his hand away, but his eyes went guarded. "Does it hurt?" Clara asked softly. "Only when it gets cold," Eli said. "Or when the weather changes." "How?" she asked. She didn't need to finish the sentence. Eli screwed the cap back onto the canteen. His voice was flat, pulling something out that should have stayed in. Clara looked at his hand, then at the charred doorframe of her house. She understood. Fire knows fire, she thought. You are careful, she observed. With the wood, with the tools. Eli looked at his hands. I learned a long time ago that it is easy to break things. Mrs. Hale. It takes a lot longer to put them back together. He stood up, brushing the dust from his trousers. We need nails. And hinges. This door on the lean-to won't hold against a coyote, let alone a storm. I have to go to town, Clara said. I'll ride with you, Eli said. You don't have to. You have done enough. Eli looked at the horizon, where the heat shimmered like water. I need supplies too. If I am heading west, they both knew he wasn't heading west today. The lie hung between them, a fragile thing, but neither of them poked at it. The ride back to Dry Creek was quiet. The town seemed even smaller and grittier after the vastness of the open prairie. As they rode down the main street, the atmosphere changed. The indifference of the landscape was replaced by the sharp, pricking attention of human eyes. People stopped what they were doing to watch. A woman sweeping her porch paused, leaning on her broom, her gaze darting from Clara to the scarred stranger riding beside her. Two men outside the saloon stopped talking, spitting tobacco into the dust as they tracked their progress. Clara kept her chin high. but she felt the heat rising in her cheeks. She knew what they were thinking. The widow Hale, dragging a drifter home. It was improper. It was dangerous. It was a scandal in the making. They tied the horses in front of the general store. As they stepped onto the boardwalk, a young woman in a bonnet whispered loud enough to be heard. "Already? It hasn't been a day since the stable burned. Some women have no shame." Clara stiffened. She gripped her reticule tightly, her knuckles turning white. A ranch hand, leaning against a support post, laughed, a crude, wet sound. "Well, nights get cold on the prairie," the man drawled. "A widow needs a little warmth, don't she? Even if she has to pick it up off the road." Clara stopped. The shame washed over her, hot and stinging, followed instantly by a flash of anger. But before she could speak, Eli moved. He didn't draw a weapon. He simply stepped between Clara and the man. He moved with that same terrifying suddenness he had shown at the fire. He invaded the man's space, standing so close that the ranch hand had to lean back against the post. Eli's face was stone. His eyes were dark pits. The fury radiating off him was palpable, a physical wave of heat. "You got something to say about the lady?" Eli asked. His voice was very soft, almost gentle. The ranch hand swallowed. He looked at the scars on Eli's neck, then at the pistol on Eli's hip. The laughter died in his throat. "No," the man mumbled, looking down. "Just talking." Eli held the stare for a long second, letting the silence stretch until it was uncomfortable. Then he stepped back. "Mind your tongue," he said, "or I will mind it for you." He turned to Clara, his expression softening instantly. "After you, Mrs. Hale." They entered the store. Clara's heart was pounding. She was frightened by the violence she had sensed in him, but beneath the fear was a strange, fierce gratitude. No one had stood between her and the town's cruelty in a long time. They bought their supplies in silence: nails, hinges, flour, coffee, beans. As they were leaving, Sheriff Finch stepped out of his office across the street and intercepted them. "Mrs. Hale," he said, touching his hat. "Mr. Moran." "Sheriff," Clara said. Finch looked tired. He sighed, hooking his thumbs in his belt. "Look, I am not one to tell a person how to run their business, but people talk. Clara, let them talk." Clara said, "They are saying you have taken in a hired gun. They are saying it's asking for trouble. I needed help with the repairs." Clara said, "I am paying him for his labor." Finch looked at Eli. "Is that right?" "Yes, sir," Eli said. Finch chewed on the inside of his cheek. "Just be careful. Barrett Cole was asking about you this morning. Moran. He doesn't like strangers stirring up dust, and he surely doesn't like people digging around old fires." It was a warning, plain and simple. Clara felt a cold knot in her stomach. "We are just fixing a fence." "Amos," Clara said, "that is no crime." "Not yet," Finch said darkly. "Just watch your back, both of you, back at the ranch." The sun was beginning to set, casting long, bruised shadows across the scorched earth. They unloaded the supplies. Clara stood by the newly repaired corral, watching Daisy eat the hay they had brought. She turned to Eli. He was uncinching his saddle, his movements slow and weary. He looked like a man who had been walking for 100 years. "Mr. Moran," Clara said. Eli paused, looking over the seat of his saddle. "Ma'am, you can't sleep on the ground, not with the coyotes this close." Eli shrugged. "I have slept in worse places." Clara pointed to the concrete slab that had once been the bunkhouse foundation. The walls were gone, but the floor was solid, and part of the chimney was still standing, offering a windbreak. "You can pitch your bedroll there," she said, "and if you are willing to stay on for a few days, I could use the help. There is more fencing to do, and the well needs clearing." She took a breath, trying to make her voice sound businesslike. "I can't pay much, but I can offer food, and a safe place to sleep, and I can pay you $1 a day." It was a pretense. They both knew it. She was offering him a home, however temporary, and he was offering her protection, but they needed the structure of a business arrangement to make it acceptable, to build a wall against the impropriety of it. Eli looked at her. He saw the tremble in her hands. He saw the fear she was trying to hide. $1 a day is fair. He said, "Thank you," Clara said. Her voice softened. "Thank you for today." In town, he didn't deserve her thanks. If she knew who he was, what he had done, she would chase him off with that rifle she talked about. But he nodded, accepting the grace he hadn't earned. Night fell over the plains, absolute and heavy. The wind did not die down. It shifted, howling around the broken chimney of the farmhouse like a lost spirit. Clara had pitched a small canvas tent she kept for emergencies near the ruins of the house. It was cramped, but it was shelter. She lay on her cot, wrapped in wool blankets, listening to the night. She heard the yip-yip howl of a coyote pack moving along the creek bed. In the past, that sound would have terrified her. It underscored her isolation, her vulnerability. But tonight, there was another sound. 50 yards away, in the shelter of the bunkhouse foundation, she could hear the faint, rhythmic sound of metal on leather. Eli was mending tack by the light of a small fire, and under the wind, she heard a low, rumbling sound. He was humming. It was a tuneless, wandering melody, something dark and slow. But it was a human sound. Clara closed her eyes. The knowledge that another living soul was within shouting distance was a profound shift in her world. It was comforting, yes, but it was also unsettling. She had built high walls around her grief. Having someone inside the perimeter made her feel exposed. She fell asleep listening to the hum, and for the first time in 2 years, she did not dream of the fire. The days fell into a rhythm, driven by the rising and setting of the sun. It was hard, grueling work. The romance of the West did not exist here. There was only the cracked earth, the weight of the timber, and the relentless wind. They repaired the perimeter fence, stretching barbed wire until their muscles screamed. They hauled water from the low creek in heavy wooden buckets, trudging back and forth until their boots were caked with mud. They cleared the debris from around the house, stacking the charred wood into a pile to be burned later, a task that Clara watched with a tight throat. Eli worked like a man possessed. He pushed himself from dawn until dusk, as if he could sweat the guilt out of his pores. His hands grew raw, the calluses splitting and bleeding, but he never complained. Clara worked beside him. She wore an old work dress, the hem stained with mud. She tied her hair back with a piece of twine. She was stronger than she looked, driven by a desperate need to reclaim this land, to prove to Barrett and the town and herself that she was not just a victim. The shared hardship began to knit a bond between them. It was a quiet thing, unspoken, built on the passing of a hammer, the sharing of a canteen, the mutual nod of exhaustion at the end of the day. Small moments began to flicker in the gray landscape. On the third day, they were down at the creek. The bank was slick with mud. Clara lost her footing, her boots sliding on the wet clay. She flailed, dropping the water bucket. Eli was there instantly. His hand shot out, catching her by the elbow. His grip was strong and sure. He pulled her upright, steadying her against his chest. For a second, the world narrowed down to the point of contact, his hand on her arm, her hand clutching his shirt. She could feel the heat of his body, the solid wall of his chest. He smelled of sweat, tobacco, and saddle leather, a masculine, earthy scent that was suddenly overwhelming. Eli didn't let go immediately. His fingers lingered on her arm. He looked down at her, his dark eyes searching her face. The air between them seemed to vibrate. "You all right?" he asked, his voice low. Clara nodded, breathless. "Yes, thank you." She pulled away, smoothing her dress, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. That evening, Eli cut his forearm on a rusty nail while fixing the corral gate. It was a jagged tear, bleeding freely. "Sit," Clara ordered, pointing to a crate near the fire. She fetched her sewing kit and a strip of clean linen. She cleaned the wound with whiskey. Ignoring his sharp intake of breath, she leaned in close to bandage it. The firelight played across his face, highlighting the sharp angles of his cheekbones and the curve of his mouth. Clara's breath caught in her throat. She was close enough to see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. She was close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his skin. She wrapped the linen efficiently, but her fingers trembled slightly as she tied the knot. She felt a magnetic pull, a desire to touch the skin above the bandage, to trace the line of his jaw. It terrified her. "There," she said, stepping back quickly. "Keep it clean." "Thank you, Clara," he said. He used her name. It sounded intimate in the darkness. They ate their meals in silence, sitting on the ground near the fire, plate of beans, stale biscuits, black coffee. Their eyes would meet across the flames and then slide away, terrified of what they might acknowledge. There was something growing between them, as stubborn and undeniable as the grass pushing up through the ash. But with the connection came the conflict. Eli lay in his bedroll at night, staring at the stars. He wanted to stay. God help him. He wanted to stay. He wanted to wake up and see Clara's face. He wanted to be the man who fixed her fences and kept her safe. But then he would close his eyes and hear the screams. He would see the faces of the families he had helped displace. He would remember Jake Brogan's laugh as a barn went up in flames. He was a liar. He was a fraud. If Clara knew the truth, that he was one of the dogs that men like Barrett Cole unleashed, she would hate him. And she should. He would dream of fire. He would wake up gasping, his heart racing, hearing the phantom cry of a child in the wind. Henry. He had never met the boy, but the boy haunted him. Clara had her own turmoil. She lay in her tent, consumed by guilt. Every time she looked at Eli and felt a flutter of warmth, she felt she was betraying Thomas. Thomas, who had built this ranch. Thomas, who had died trying to save it. How could she want this stranger? How could she feel safe with a drifter when her husband was in the ground? But the body has its own memory and its own needs. The loneliness was a physical ache. When Eli was near, the ache subsided. When his shoulder brushed hers, her skin tingled. It was like dry grass waiting for a spark. It was dangerous. It was wrong. And it was the only thing that made her feel alive. On the 5th day, a buggy rattled up the track from town. It was a clerk from the land office, a nervous young man named Perkins, who looked like he would rather be anywhere else. He kept glancing at Eli, who stood by the corral with a hammer in his hand, watching silently. "Mrs. Hale," Perkins stammered, holding out an envelope. "Mr. Cole asked me to deliver this. It has been filed with the county." Clara took the envelope. Her hands were dirty from the garden. She tore it open. It was a formal legal document. The language was flowery and polite, but the meaning was brutal. Whereas the property known as the Hale claim has been deemed a fire hazard and a public safety risk, whereas the current owner lacks the resources to maintain proper fire breaks. Mr. Barrett Cole hereby submits a final offer of purchase for the purpose of consolidated ranching and regional security. The price listed was insulting. It was less than the first offer. Clara lowered the paper. Her face was pale. "Public safety," she whispered. "He calls it public safety." She looked at Perkins. "Tell Mr. Cole that my answer has not changed. Tell him this land is not for sale, not for safety, not for money, not for threats." Perkins swallowed. "Mrs. Hale, please." "The judge." "Mr. Cole has influence. If he petitions the court that the land is abandoned or hazardous—" "It is not abandoned," Clara snapped. "I am standing right here." Perkins tipped his hat nervously and scrambled back into his buggy. He whipped the horse and drove away fast, dust billowing behind him. Clara stood trembling, the letter crushed in her fist. "He is going to take it," she said. "He burned it down. And now he is going to steal the ashes." She turned to Eli. Her eyes were wild. "He burned it. Eli, I know he did. He set the fire that killed them. And he set the stable fire to kill Daisy. He wants to drive me out so he can have the water rights." Eli looked at the ground. He kicked a stone with his boot. He didn't say anything. Clara stared at him. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. "You know, don't you?" she asked. Eli looked up. His face was guarded. "You know how men like him work." She pressed. "You saw the stable fire. You smelled the smoke. Tell me I am right. I have seen men do ugly things for land," Eli said carefully. "I have seen them use fire. I have seen them use the law." "Who?" Clara demanded. "Who have you seen?" Eli looked away toward the horizon. "Just men, out west." "Why won't you say it?" Clara stepped closer. Her frustration was mixing with fear. There was a shadow in his eyes she couldn't read. "You know something more. You look at this ruin like you recognize it." "I don't know Barrett Cole." Eli lied. It tasted like ash on his tongue. "But I know his kind, and if he wants this land—" "Clara, he won't stop with a letter." "Then we fight him," Clara said fiercely. "We?" Eli asked. Clara stopped. She looked at him, scarred, weary, standing on her land with a hammer in his hand. "Yes," she said, "we, unless you are planning to leave." Eli looked at her. He saw the fire in her eyes. He wanted to run. He wanted to stay. "I'm not leaving yet," he said. The sky began to change in the late afternoon. It wasn't a thunderstorm. There were no clouds, only a strange, bruised darkening of the blue. The wind stopped suddenly. The silence was absolute. The birds stopped singing. The insects stopped buzzing. Then, on the horizon, a brown wall appeared. It stretched from the earth to the heavens, a solid, rolling mountain of earth. "Dust storm," Eli said. He moved instantly. "Get the horses, put them in the lean-to." They scrambled. The paralysis of the heavy conversation was broken by the immediate threat of the land. They dragged Daisy and the gelding into the three-walled shelter of the lean-to. Tying them short, they grabbed the canvas from the tent, the tools, the water buckets. The wall of dust hit them with the force of a physical blow. The light vanished. The world turned to screaming, choking brown. The wind roared like a train. Grit stung their eyes and filled their noses. It was impossible to see more than a foot ahead. "Inside," Eli yelled, grabbing Clara's hand. He dragged her into the small tool shed they had patched up yesterday. It was the only fully enclosed structure left standing. It was tiny, barely big enough for the tools, let alone two people. They tumbled inside, and Eli slammed the door, jamming a piece of wood into the latch to hold it against the wind. The darkness inside was total. The roar of the storm outside was deafening, burying the shed in a deluge of dirt. They were pressed together in the cramped space. Clara's back was against the rough wood of the wall. Eli was pressed against her. His hands braced on the wall on either side of her head to keep from crushing her. They were breathing hard, coughing. The air in the shed was hot and stale, smelling of old grease and dry earth. Clara could feel Eli's body against hers, his legs tangling with hers, his chest heaving. She reached out in the dark, her hand finding his arm. She felt the scars under the sleeve. "Are you okay?" she whispered, though he couldn't hear her over the wind. Eli leaned his forehead against the wall, right next to her ear. He was trembling. The enclosed space, the noise, the dust. It was too close to the fire. "I'm here," he said. Clara turned her face toward him. In the gloom, she could just make out the outline of his profile. The storm raged outside, trying to tear their fragile shelter apart. But inside, a different kind of pressure was building. The proximity was overwhelming. Clara felt a tear slide down her cheek, cutting a track through the dust. She was terrified of the storm. She was terrified of Barrett. She was terrified of the man standing inches from her, and she wanted him to hold her. She shifted, her body brushing against his. Eli went rigid. He didn't pull away. He didn't move. He stood there, a statue in the dark, fighting a war within himself. "Please," Clara whispered again. She didn't know what she was asking for. Forgiveness? Comfort? Love? Eli turned his head. His breath ghosted across her cheek. He was so close. "Don't," he breathed, but he didn't move back. The storm howled, burying them, leaving them burning in the dark. The world that emerged from the dust storm was not the one they had left behind. The screaming wind had died into a silence so profound it felt like the earth itself had stopped breathing. Everything, the splintered fence posts, the charred remains of the barn, the canvas of the tent, was coated in a fine, suffocating powder that turned the landscape into a sepia photograph of itself. Clara Hale stepped out of the tool shed, coughing into her sleeve. The air hung heavy and still, shimmering with suspended grit. She felt strange, unmoored, her skin pricking with the memory of Eli Moran's body pressed against hers in the dark. The intimacy of the shed had been a necessity of survival, but it had breached a wall she had spent 2 years fortifying. Eli followed her out. He looked like a ghost. His dark clothes turned gray by the dust, his face a mask of exhaustion. He did not look at her. He moved to check the horses in the lean-to, his boots making no sound in the soft drifts of dirt. The tension between them was brittle, a dry twig ready to snap. Clara walked toward the pile of supplies they had hastily covered before the storm. The wind had been capricious. It had buried the water buckets but stripped the cover off the crate where she had placed the mail. The letter from the land office lay pinned against a rock, battered and blown open. Clara picked it up. The paper was gritty under her fingers. She meant to fold it away, to hide the thread of Barrett coal back in her pocket. But a line of text caught her eye. It was in the addendum, a section she had been too angry to read closely the first time. Witness to prior negotiation and sale refusal, Mr. Jacob Brogan, foreman. Clara froze. The name struck her like a physical blow. Jake Brogan. She remembered him. He had been a rough, loud man who worked for Barrett years ago, a man who smelled of stale whiskey and cruelty. He had been there the day Thomas refused the first offer. And he had disappeared from Dry Creek 3 days after the fire. She looked up. Eli was calming Daisy, stroking the mare's nose with a hand that still trembled slightly. "Eli," Clara said. Her voice sounded loud in the unnatural quiet. He turned, his eyes guarded. She held up the letter. "This document lists a witness, Jake Brogan." She saw Eli stiffen. It was a subtle reaction, a tightening of the shoulders, a stillness that came over him like a shutter closing. "You know him," Clara stated. It was not a question. Eli looked at the horizon, where the dust still hazed the sun into a pale, sickly disk. "I know the name." Clara walked over to him, the letter crinkling in her fist. "He used to work for Barrett. He vanished right after the fire. If Barrett lists him as a witness to the sale attempts, then Jake was involved. He knows what happened." Eli took a slow breath. "Jake Brogan is a bad man." "Clara, I don't care if he is the devil himself," Clara said, her voice shaking. "If he knows about the fire, I need to talk to him." "He is not in Dry Creek," Eli said. "Barrett cut him loose years ago. He drinks his wages in Silverton now. It is a rail town. It is no place for you. Silverton was a day's ride north, a rough scar of a settlement built on iron rails and vice." "I am going," Clara said. Eli looked at her then. He saw the set of her jaw, the desperation that burned through her exhaustion. He knew that look. It was the look of someone who would walk through hell to find a drop of water. He also knew that if she went to Silverton alone, she would likely not come back. And if she found Jake Brogan, she would find the truth about Eli Moran. He felt the trap closing around him. He could leave now. He could mount his horse and ride west, outrunning the confession that was waiting in Silverton. But he looked at Clara, standing in the dust of her ruined life, refusing to break. "I will saddle the horses," Eli said quietly. The ride to Silverton was a punishment. The country north of Dry Creek was broken land, a maze of dry washes and rocky ridges where nothing grew but thorns and venom. The wind picked up again. Not a storm this time, but a biting, relentless cutter that sliced through their coats and chapped their lips. They rode in silence. It was not the companionable silence of the workdays, but a heavy, loaded quiet. Clara rode with her eyes fixed forward, her mind replaying the night of the fire, trying to fit Jake Brogan's face into the shadows of her memory. Eli rode a length behind her. He felt sick. Every hoofbeat took him closer to his own destruction. He watched Clara's straight back, the way she held her head high against the wind, and he hated himself with a fresh, acidic intensity. He wanted to tell her. He opened his mouth a dozen times to speak, to confess it all out here in the emptiness where her anger might only leave him stranded rather than destroyed. But the words turned to ash in his throat. He was a coward. He told himself he was protecting her, but he knew he was only protecting the fragile way she looked at him, with trust. God help him. With trust. They reached Silverton as evening fell. It was a different beast than Dry Creek. Dry Creek was dying. Silverton was alive with a frantic, dirty energy. The railroad tracks sliced through the center of town like a jagged suture. Smoke from the engines hung low over the streets, mixing with the smell of unwashed bodies, coal and cheap liquor. Men crowded the boardwalks. Railroad workers, drifters, gamblers. They stared as Clara rode past. It was a predatory kind of staring. A woman alone, or even a woman with a single ragged escort, was fair game for eyes that had forgotten decency. Eli moved his horse closer to hers, his hand resting near his hip. His face settled into the hard, dangerous mask he wore to keep the world at bay. "We will try the Golden Spike," Eli said, his voice flat. "It is where men like Jake end up. They tied the horses outside the saloon." The noise from inside spilled out into the street. A discordant piano, the clatter of chips, the roar of drunken laughter. Clara hesitated at the batwing doors. She had never been inside such a place. To enter a saloon was to forfeit one's standing as a respectable woman. "Stay close to me," Eli murmured. He pushed the doors open and they stepped inside. The air was thick enough to chew. Smoke swirled in the yellow light of kerosene lamps. The floor was covered in sawdust that was dark with spit and spilled ale. The room went quiet for a heartbeat as they entered, eyes turning to appraise the newcomers. Then the noise resumed, a little sharper than before. The barkeep, a man with a greased mustache and eyes like flint, watched them approach the bar. He did not wipe the counter. "We don't serve ladies," he said, looking past Clara as if she were a piece of furniture. "Unless they are working." Clara felt the heat rise in her face, but she did not flinch. "I am looking for a man. Aren't we all?" "Honey?" A voice slurred from a nearby table. Eli turned his head. He didn't say a word. He just looked at the man who had spoken. The man, seeing the scars on Eli's neck and the stillness of his hands, suddenly found his drink very interesting. Clara placed a silver dollar on the wet wood of the bar. "Jake Brogan," she said. The barkeep looked at the coin, then at Eli. He snatched the dollar. "Back corner, plain faro. He is deep in the bottle. Friend, don't expect much conversation." They walked through the crowded room. A woman with bruised wrists and too much rouge on her cheeks brushed past them, carrying a tray of whiskey. She looked at Clara with dull, tired eyes, a flicker of curiosity dying instantly into indifference. In the back corner sat a man who looked like a sack of grain that had been left out in the rain. Jake Brogan had grown fat and sloppy. His shirt was stained, his beard matted. But Clara recognized him. She recognized the mean set of his eyes and the way his mouth twisted when he lost a hand. He was arguing with the dealer, his voice loud and wet. "You cheated, you tin-horn bastard." "Jake," Eli said. The name cut through the noise. Jake Brogan froze. He turned slowly in his chair, blinking against the smoke. He squinted at Eli. He looked at the scars on Eli's hand, then up to the burns on his neck. A slow, ugly smile spread across his face, revealing yellow teeth. "Well, I'll be damned," Jake wheezed. "If it ain't the fire dog." Clara felt the blood drain from her face. "Fire dog." Jake laughed, a hacking sound that turned into a cough. "I heard you were dead. Moran. Or in prison. What brings Barrett's favorite lighter to a hole like this?" Eli took a step forward. His face was pale beneath the tan. "Shut your mouth, Jake." Jake ignored him. He looked at Clara. His eyes widened, then narrowed in recognition. "And look at this," he sneered. "You brought company. I know you. You are the widow." "The Hale woman." He looked back at Eli, shaking his head in mock amazement. "You got some nerve. Moran, riding around with her. Does she know? Does she know how good you are with a match?" Eli lunged. It happened in a blur. Eli crossed the distance and grabbed Jake by the lapels of his filthy coat. Hauling him out of the chair, he slammed him against the rough wood of the wall, knocking a framed picture to the floor with a crash. "Shut up," Eli roared. The saloon went silent. Jake just laughed, though he was dangling half off the floor. His breath smelled of rot. Hit me all you want. Fire dog, Jake sputtered. It don't change the color of the sky that night. Pretty little ranch wife. Place lit up like the 4th of July. Eli drew back his fist, his eyes blind with rage and shame. Stop! Clara's voice cracked like a whip. Eli froze, his fist hovering inches from Jake's face. He was breathing hard, his chest heaving. He didn't look at Clara. He couldn't. Clara stepped forward. Her hands were shaking, but she clasped them together to steady them. Let him go. Eli released his grip slowly. Jake slid down the wall, landing in a heap, straightening his coat with a sneer. Clara looked at Eli. Her eyes were wide, dark pools of horror. What did he mean? She whispered. Why did he call you that? Eli closed his eyes. The silence in the saloon was heavy, watching the drama unfold like a play. Tell her, Jake taunted from the floor. Tell her about the Wyoming job. Tell her about the creek bed. Tell her who rode point for Barrett when we cleared the valley. Eli turned to face her. He looked stripped raw. The defenses were gone. I rode with them. Clara. The words hung in the air, toxic and heavy. Clara took a step back, as if he had struck her. With Barrett? Yes. When? 5 years ago? And 2 years ago, the world seemed to tilt on its axis. Clara grabbed the back of a chair to steady herself. 2 years ago, she repeated. The fire? Eli nodded. A jerky, painful motion. I was there. Clara made a sound, a low, wounded cry that she tried to stifle with her hand. The man who had pulled her from the stable, the man who had fixed her fence, the man whose hum had lulled her to sleep. You burned us, she whispered. No. Eli stepped toward her, his hands out pleadingly. No, Clara, I swear, I didn't light it. But you were there, she accused, her voice rising to a scream. You were with them. I tried to stop them, Eli shouted back, the desperation pouring out of him. I didn't know there was a child. Barrett told us the house was empty. He said it was just a scare tactic. When I saw the rocking horse on the porch, I tried to stop Jake. I tried to put it out. He pointed a shaking finger at Jake. He lit the oil. I fought him, but the wind took it. It went up so fast. He looked at his scarred hand, then ripped the glove off his left hand, holding both maimed limbs out to her. I went in. Clara, I went in after them. I found Thomas in the hallway. The roof came down. That is where I got these, pulling him out. But he was already gone. And the boy. He couldn't finish. He choked on the memory. Clara stared at him. She saw the truth in his agony. But it didn't matter. It was too much. The betrayal was too total. He had been part of the monster that ate her life. He had touched her with hands that had helped kill her husband. You liar, she breathed. You coward. She swung her hand. The slap echoed through the silent saloon like a gunshot. Eli's head snapped to the side. He took the blow without flinching. He deserved it. He deserved worse. Get away from me, Clara hissed. Don't you ever come near me again. She turned away from him, blinding tears filling her eyes. She saw Jake Brogan trying to slide along the wall toward the back door, a smirk on his face. The rage that filled her then was white-hot. It was a cleansing fire. She wasn't just a victim anymore. She was the avenging angel of her own ruin. She moved faster than thought. She lunged toward Eli's horse, which was tied just outside the open door. No, Eli was inside. She grabbed the pistol from Eli's holster. Eli was too stunned by the slap to stop her. Clara leveled the heavy Colt revolver at Jake Brogan. It was too big for her hand, heavy and smelling of oil, but she held it with 2 hands, aiming straight at Jake's chest. Sit down, she commanded. Jake froze. The smirk vanished. He looked at the gun, then at the woman holding it. Her hands were shaking, but her eyes were dead calm. Now, lady, Jake stammered, raising his hands. Don't do nothing foolish. Sit down, Clara screamed. Jake sat, landing hard on the floorboards. Clara cocked the hammer. The click was loud in the room. Talk, she said. About what? Jake sweated. About the fire. About Barrett. I want to hear you say it. Eli stepped forward cautiously. "Clara, stay back," she yelled at him, not taking her eyes off Jake. "If you come near me, I swear I will shoot him, and then I will shoot you." She turned back to Jake. "Say it." "Barrett ordered it," Jake blurted out, his eyes fixed on the black bore of the pistol. "He wanted the water rights. Hale wouldn't sell. Barrett told us to burn him out. He said to make it look like an accident." "And the boy?" Clara asked, tears streaming down her face. "Did he order you to kill my son?" Jake swallowed. "He didn't say nothing about the kid. We didn't know. It was just a job. Just a job," Clara whispered. Her finger tightened on the trigger. It would be so easy. Just a small squeeze, and the man who lit the match would be gone. The justice of it sang in her blood. She wanted to see him bleed. She wanted him to burn. "Clara!" Eli's voice was right beside her ear. He had moved silently. He didn't touch the gun. He just stood close, his body shielding her from the rest of the room. "Don't do it," he said softly. "He deserves it," Clara sobbed. "He does," Eli agreed. "He deserves to die screaming. But if you pull that trigger, you become him. You become a killer. And you are not a killer. Clara, you are the woman who tried to save a horse from a fire. Don't let Barrett take that from you too." Clara was shaking violently. The gun wavered. "Give it to me," Eli said. He reached out slowly and covered her hands with his own, his scarred skin against her cold fingers. He gently pried her grip loose. She let go with a gasp, as if the weapon had been burning her. Eli took the gun, decocked it, and holstered it. He looked at Jake, who was slumped on the floor, weeping with relief. "Get up," Eli said coldly. "You are coming with us?" "Where?" Jake whimpered. "To Dry Creek, to Sheriff Finch." Jake laughed, a hysterical, bubbling sound. "Finch? You think Finch can touch Barrett? Barrett owns the law in this county. You are just dragging me to my grave. Moran. And yours too. Get up," Eli repeated. The ride back to Dry Creek was a nightmare of endurance. They had tied Jake's hands and lashed him to his own horse, leading him behind them. The prairie was a void of darkness. Distant thunder rolled along the horizon, promising rain that never fell. The wind had turned cold, carrying the scent of ozone and dust. Clara rode in front. She did not look back. Not once. Eli rode at the rear. He watched her silhouette against the stars. The distance between them was no longer measured in yards. It was measured in lies. He had lost her. He had known he would. But the reality of it was a physical pain, a crushing weight in his chest. Jake Brogan mumbled and cursed in the saddle between them, but neither of them told him to shut up. They were too wrapped in their own separate miseries. They arrived in Dry Creek just before dawn. The town was asleep, gray and silent. They rode straight to the jailhouse. Sheriff Finch came to the door in his long johns, rubbing sleep from his eyes. He looked at Clara, pale and fierce. He looked at Eli, grim and hollow. And he looked at Jake Brogan, bound and sullen. "What is this?" Finch asked. "This is the witness," Clara said, her voice brittle as glass. "He just confessed to setting the fire at my ranch. On Barrett Cole's orders." Finch looked at Jake. "Is that true, Brogan?" Jake spit on the ground. "Barrett will have your badge for this. Finch, you locked me up, and you are signing your own warrant." Finch looked at the prisoner, then at Clara. He sighed, a long, weary sound. But he stepped back and held the door open. "Bring him in. They locked Jake in the single cell." He slumped on the cot, glaring at them. "I need a statement," Finch said, pulling a ledger from his desk. Eli spoke up. "I will write it. I was there." Finch looked at him sharply. "You were there?" "I was with them," Eli said, his voice devoid of emotion. "I didn't light the fire, but I was part of the crew." "I will testify to that." Finch stared at him for a long moment. "You know what that means for you, son? You admit to being an accomplice to arson and murder. You hang right alongside him." "I know," Eli said. Clara turned and walked out of the office. She couldn't stand to hear it. She couldn't stand to be in the same room with him. The sun was up when they returned to the ranch. They turned the horses into the corral. Eli unsaddled Daisy for her. He tried to hand Clara the reins. Clara didn't take them. She walked past him toward the house, toward the tent. "Clara," Eli said. She stopped but didn't turn. "I will pack my things." He said, "I will sleep in the barn until the hearing, if you want. Or I can stay in town. Stay in the bunkhouse." Clara said. Her voice was cold, clipped. "I need you to testify. Until then, you are just a witness." She went into the tent and tied the flaps shut. Eli stood alone in the ruin of the yard. He felt gutted. He went to the bunkhouse foundation and sat on his bedroll, putting his head in his hands. He replayed the night of the fire over and over. He saw Thomas Hale's face. He heard the roar. And now, layered over it, he saw the look in Clara's eyes when she slapped him. He was a fool. He had thought, for a few shining days, that he could be redeemed. But ash was ash. You couldn't build on it. 2 days passed. They were days of suffocating silence. Clara worked on her sewing in the tent. Eli worked on the fence, miles away from the house. They moved like planets in different orbits, terrified of collision. Then Barrett Cole came. He arrived in the late afternoon, driving his polished black buggy. The sun glinted off the brass fittings. He pulled up to the edge of the yard, where Clara was hanging laundry on a line strung between 2 burnt posts. She froze when she saw him. Barrett stepped down. He was impeccable, his suit brushed, his boots shining. He held his hat in his hand. "Mrs. Hale," he said smoothly. "Get off my land," Clara said. Barrett tutted softly. "So much anger. It is bad for the complexion. My dear," he walked closer, inspecting the repairs Eli had made to the fence. "I heard you took a trip to Silverton," he said, "and brought back an old friend of mine, Jake Brogan. He is in the jail." Clara said, "He told the sheriff everything." Barrett smiled. It was a reptile smile, devoid of warmth. "Jake is a drunkard and a liar. No judge in this territory will take the word of a known gambler over a pillar of the community." "We have another witness," Clara said. Barrett paused. "Ah, the drifter, Mr. Moran." He looked toward the bunkhouse, where Eli was nowhere to be seen. "I did some checking on your mister. Moran," Barrett said. "Did you know he is wanted in Wyoming? Cattle rustling, arson, a real desperado." Clara felt a chill, but she stood her ground. "He is going to testify." "Is he?" Barrett stepped closer. He invaded her space, smelling of bay rum and expensive cigars. "Think about how it looks. Clara, a respectable widow, living out here alone with a wanted criminal, riding to saloons with him, sleeping, well, near him." He lowered his voice. "If this goes to court, I won't just destroy his credibility. I will destroy your reputation. I will paint a picture of a lonely woman and her violent lover conspiring to blackmail a wealthy neighbor. The town is already whispering. I can make them scream." He leaned in. "Drop the charges. Clara, sell me the land. I will give you enough to start over in St. Louis, somewhere no one knows your name. Or stay, and watch everything you have left burn down around you." He put his hat back on. "Think about it." He turned and walked back to his buggy. Clara stood trembling in the wind. The threat was precise and terrifying. He would use the town's prejudice, the very thing she had fought against, to bury the truth. She looked at the bunkhouse. Eli was standing in the shadows of the doorway. He had heard. She could tell by the slump of his shoulders. He had heard Barrett say that his presence was poisoning her chance at justice. Night fell, dark and moonless. The wind picked up, rattling the canvas of the tent. Clara couldn't breathe. The anger, the fear, the confusion. It was a storm inside her chest. She needed to scream. She needed to break something. She marched across the yard to the bunkhouse. Eli was sitting on his crate, cleaning his gun by the light of a lantern. He looked up when she stormed in. His face was a mask of misery. "You heard him," Clara said. "I heard him." Eli said, "He is right." He stood up and began to roll his bedroll. "I'm leaving. Clara, if I stay, I just give him ammunition. I will go to the sheriff, give my deposition, and then I will ride out. It is the only way you win this." "No!" Clara shouted. Eli froze. "You don't get to leave." Clara stepped into the light. "You don't get to run away again. You ran from Wyoming. You ran from the fire. You are not running from this. I am trying to save you," Eli yelled back, his controls snapping. "Look at me, Clara. I am the thing that ruins everything I touch. I burned your life down. I am the reason you are alone. I know," she screamed. "I hate you for it. I look at you and I see the fire. I see Thomas dying. Then let me go. I can't." The words hung in the air, raw and bleeding. Clara was chest to chest with him now. She was crying, furious, angry tears. "I hate you," she sobbed. "But you are the only one who stayed. You are the only one who pulled me out. I hate you, and I can't breathe when you aren't here." Eli looked at her. He saw the war in her eyes, the hatred and the need, fighting for purchase. "Clara," he whispered. She grabbed his shirt, her fists bunching in the fabric. She shook him. "Why did you have to be him? Why couldn't you just be a cowboy?" "I'm sorry," he choked out. "I'm so sorry." She looked up at him, her face wet with tears, her lips parted in a sob. And then the distance vanished. It wasn't a decision. It was a collision. Clara pulled him down, and Eli crashed into her. Their mouths met in a kiss that was not gentle. It was fierce, desperate, tasting of salt and ash. It was a kiss of grief and fury. Clara's hands clawed at his shoulders. Eli's arms wrapped around her, crushing her against him as if he were trying to merge their broken pieces into something whole. There was no tenderness in it, only a starving, terrifying need. They were two people drowning in the dark, clutching at the only driftwood they could find. They broke apart, gasping for air. Clara's forehead rested against his chest. Eli's face was buried in her hair. They were shaking, terrified by what they had just done, frightened by the fire that had ignited between them, a fire that threatened to consume whatever was left of their souls. "We are going to hell," Clara whispered into his shirt. Eli held her tighter, his eyes squeezed shut against the dark. "We are already there, Clara. We are just trying to find the way out." The morning sun did not bring warmth to the high plains. It rose pale and distant, a white coin nailed to a sheet of frozen blue iron. The light was brittle, shattering against the hard angles of the ruined ranch and exposing every scar on the land. Clara Hale stepped out of her tent and pulled her shawl tight against the chill. The air tasted of frost and lingering dust. She moved stiffly, her body aching not from labor, but from the tension that had coiled inside her tight as a watch spring. She looked toward the bunkhouse foundation. Eli Moran was there, saddling his horse. He moved with a mechanical precision, cinching the girth, checking the stirrup leather. He did not look up when she emerged. The space between them vibrated. It was charged with the memory of the night before, the desperate, crushing weight of their bodies against each other, the taste of salt and ash, the terrifying admission of need. The kiss hung in the air like smoke that refused to dissipate. Clara walked to the fire pit to start the coffee. Her hands shook as she struck the match. She felt a storm raging inside her chest, a collision of two violent fronts. Part of her wanted to run to him, to bury her face in the rough wool of his coat and beg him to hold her until the fear went away. But another part of her looked at him and saw the shadow of the man who had ridden with the arsonists. She saw the flames that took Thomas. She saw the betrayal. Eli finished saddling the gelding and walked over to the fire. He kept his hat pulled low. His face was drawn, the skin beneath his eyes dark with sleeplessness. "Coffee will be ready in a minute," Clara said. Her voice sounded strange to her ears, too high and thin. "I can't stay for it," Eli said. He stood on the other side of the fire, the flames dancing between them. He finally looked at her. His eyes were unguarded for a brief second, revealing a depth of misery that made Clara's breath catch. Then the shutter came down, and he was the stone-faced cowboy again. "Where are you going?" she asked. "Town," he said. "I need to speak to the sheriff, and then I have some riding to do." "Riding where?" "Just checking the perimeter." He lied. It was a clumsy lie, flat and unconvincing. Clara watched him. "You are going to him, aren't you? You are going to Barrett." Eli adjusted his gloves. He tugged at the cuff, covering the scar on his wrist. "Barrett won't stop. Clara, not unless he is forced. The sheriff needs more than just my word and a drunkard's confession. He needs something that Barrett can't buy his way out of. You will get yourself killed, Clara said. The fear spiked in her chest. Sharp and sudden. Maybe, Eli said. He turned and walked back to his horse. He mounted up, the leather creaking in the silence. He looked down at her one last time, and for a moment, he looked like he wanted to say something. An apology, a promise, a goodbye. But he just touched the brim of his hat. Stay close to the house. Clara, keep the rifle handy. He turned the horse and rode out, a solitary dark figure moving against the vast, indifferent canvas of the prairie. Clara watched him until he was just a speck in the distance, feeling a hollow ache in her stomach that had nothing to do with hunger. Sheriff Amos Finch sat behind his desk, staring at a stack of wanted posters as if they contained the secrets of the universe. The office smelled of stale tobacco and floor wax. When Eli walked in, Finch didn't look surprised. He just gestured to the empty chair. "You look like a man walking to a funeral, son," Finch said. Eli didn't sit. He stood by the door, his hand resting near his gun. "Is Jake Brogan still in the cell?" Eli asked. Finch nodded. "He is awake, asking for whiskey, asking for a lawyer, asking for Barrett Cole. I haven't given him any of them." "He will recant," Eli said. "As soon as Barrett gets a lawyer to him. Jake will say we forced him to talk. He will say Clara held a gun on him." Finch sighed and leaned back, the chair groaning under his weight. "I know. That is how these things go. The law is a slippery thing out here. Moran. It bends toward the gold. There has to be a way," Eli said. Finch picked up a pipe and tapped the bowl against his palm. "The circuit judge is due in 3 weeks. Judge Holloway. He is a hard man, but he is fair. He doesn't like cattle barons who think they are kings. If we can get this to a hearing, if we can get Brogan on the stand before Barrett gets to him, maybe we have a chance. But we need more," Eli said. "We need corroboration." Finch looked at him steadily. "We have you. You put yourself in the noose with that statement you wrote. A jury won't trust me," Eli said bitterly. "Barrett will paint me as a rustler and a thug. He is already doing it." Finch didn't deny it. He just looked out the window at the dusty street. "Be careful, Moran. I hear you are planning a ride." Eli stiffened. "Word travels fast." Finch shrugged. "Dry Creek is a small bowl. The echoes bounce around. If you are going where I think you are going, just remember that a dead witness is no use to misses. Hale, I'm not going as a witness," Eli said. He turned and walked out. The ride to Barrett Cole's North Camp was a journey through a land that God had made in anger. Eli rode north, away from the town and the river, into the broken badlands where the cattle grazed on scrub brush and cactus. The sun hammered down. The wind died, leaving a stifling heat that rose from the rocks in shimmering waves. He passed dry creek beds that looked like cracks in a bleached skull. He saw a rattlesnake sunning itself on a flat rock, its diamondback pattern blending perfectly with the stone. It watched him pass with cold, unblinking eyes. Buzzards circled high overhead, black specks riding the thermals, waiting for something to die. The land warned him. "Turn back. You don't belong here. You are soft. You are broken." Eli kept riding. He felt a grim resolve settling in his gut. He had spent 5 years running from his past, trying to outride the shame, but he was done running. Clara had looked at him with hatred and desire, and that look had branded him. He would fix this. He would get the truth out of Barrett Cole, or he would die on this hard ground. He reached the camp by midday. It was a collection of canvas tents and a rough corral set in a box canyon. Smoke rose from a cook fire. 30 or 40 head of cattle were bunched near a muddy watering hole. 4 men were sitting around the fire, playing cards on a crate. They looked up as Eli rode in. He recognized 2 of them, hard cases from Texas who sold their guns to the highest bidder. They stood up slowly, hands drifting to their holsters. "Well, look what the cat dragged in," one of them sneered. "It is the widow's pet." Eli ignored them. He kept his eyes on the large tent at the back of the camp. "I am here to see Barrett," Eli said. The tent flap opened. Barrett Cole stepped out. He was in his shirt sleeves, holding a tin cup of coffee. He looked out of place in the dirt and filth, like a diamond sitting in a pig trough. Barrett smiled. It was a genuine smile, which made it all the more terrifying. "Mr. Moran," Barrett called out. "Or should I say, Eli. I was wondering when you would come to your senses." He gestured to the men. "Stand down, boys. He is an old friend." The men relaxed, but kept watching Eli with predatory eyes. Eli dismounted. He tied his horse to a scrub oak and walked toward Barrett. "Coffee?" Barrett offered. "It is fresh." "I didn't come for coffee," Eli said. Barrett took a sip, watching him over the rim of the cup. "No, I suppose not. You came to negotiate. That is good. I like a man who knows when the game is up." "There is no negotiation," Eli said. "I want you to write it down." "Write what down?" "The order," Eli said. "The order to burn the Hale Ranch, the order to burn the Miller place. All of it?" Barrett laughed. It was a dry, dusty sound. "You want a confession? For the sheriff? For the judge?" Eli said. Barrett shook his head, looking disappointed. "I thought you were smarter than that." "Eli, I really did. You think I became the richest man in the territory by signing my name to my solutions?" He threw the dregs of his coffee into the dirt. "Look at you," Barrett said, walking closer. "You look like a whipped dog. Sleeping in the dirt, working for a woman who looks at you like you are a disease. Is that what you want?" He put a hand on Eli's shoulder. Eli flinched, but Barrett held firm. "Come back to the fold. Eli, I have a spot for a foreman on the South Range. $50 a month. A warm bed. Respect. All you have to do is walk away from the widow. Stop filling her head with these imagined grievances." "They aren't imagined," Eli said, his voice shaking with suppressed rage. "I was there. I pulled the bodies out." Barrett's face hardened. He leaned in close. "And you helped put them there, didn't you? You rode with the torchmen. You watched the house go up. You think she will ever forgive you for that? You think you can wash that off with a few weeks of fixing fences?" He poked a finger into Eli's chest, right over his heart. "You are one of us, Eli. You always have been. You are a burner, a hired gun. You belong in the mud with the rest of the swine, not playing house with a grieving saint." Eli knocked Barrett's hand away. "I am done with you," Eli said. "I am testifying. I will tell the judge everything, about Wyoming, about the Hale fire, about the intimidation." Barrett stared at him. The mask of civility dropped completely. "You are a fool," Barrett said softly. He snapped his fingers. The blow came from behind. Eli never saw it. Something heavy, a rifle butt, maybe a club, slammed into the back of his head. The world exploded into white light and then darkness. Eli crumpled to his knees, the ground rushing up to meet him, while Eli lay in the dirt of the canyon. Clara sat in the back pew of the Dry Creek Church. It was Sunday. She had worn her best dress, the gray wool one with the high collar. She had walked through town with her head high, ignoring the whispers. But the sanctuary offered no sanctuary. The church was full, but the pew around Clara was empty. The women of the town, women whose children she had sewn clothes for, women she had shared recipes with before the fire, sat stiffly, their backs turned to her. Reverend Pike stood at the pulpit. He was a thin man with a voice that boomed like thunder in a canyon. "Purity," he shouted, slamming his hand on the Bible. "The Lord demands purity in our hearts and in our community. We cannot allow the taint of sin to dwell among us." He looked out over the congregation. His eyes lingered on Clara. "There are those who invite darkness into their homes," he thundered. "Those who lie with godless men, drifters and criminals, and think they can hide their shame from the Almighty. They stir up strife. They dig up old graves and disturb the peace of the righteous." Clara felt the blood drain from her face. He was talking about her. He was using the pulpit to brand her a harlot and a troublemaker. She felt the eyes of the town on her back, hundreds of sharp little needles. Shame burned in her throat, hot and sour. She wanted to stand up and scream. She wanted to tell them that the man they called godless was the only one who had helped her. She wanted to tell them that their respectable neighbor, Barrett Cole, was a murderer. But she sat frozen. She was the widow Hale, the cursed woman, the outsider. The service ended. Clara stood up and walked down the aisle. The crowd parted for her, pulling their skirts back as if her touch would stain them. Outside, she walked toward the general store to pick up an order of thread. Mrs. Gable was sweeping the porch. She stopped when she saw Clara. I can't help you today. Mrs. Hale, Mrs. Gable said, looking at her shoes. I just need the black thread. Clara said, I ordered it last week. Mrs. Gable shook her head. We are out of stock. And, well, Mrs. Higgins says she doesn't want you finishing her daughter's wedding dress. She says she will find someone else, someone with better judgment. Clara stared at the woman. The rejection was absolute. They were cutting off her livelihood. They were starving her out. She turned and walked to her horse, mounting with a dignity she did not feel. She rode out of town, her back straight, while the tears finally spilled over, hot and stinging in the wind. Back at the ranch, Clara was alone. The silence of the ruins was amplified by Eli's absence. She changed into her work clothes and took the rifle from the rack in the lean-to. Eli had told her to keep it handy. She was scrubbing clothes in a tub of boiling water when she heard the horses. 4 riders cresting the rise. They weren't Eli. Clara dried her hands on her apron and picked up the rifle. She walked to the center of the yard and waited. The riders slowed as they approached. They were rough men, dusty and smiling. They rode right up to the edge of the wash line. Afternoon, Mrs. Hale, the lead rider said. He had a gap in his front teeth and a lazy eye. What do you want? Clara asked. Just checking on the property, the man said. Mr. Cole likes to keep an eye on his neighbors, especially the lonely ones. He looked around the yard. Looks like your man isn't here. That is a shame. A woman shouldn't be out here all alone. Accidents happen. He urged his horse forward, stepping on the clean sheets Clara had laid out on the sagebrush to dry. Get back, Clara warned. The man laughed. Or what? You gonna shoot me? Sweetheart? He leaned down from his saddle. He was close enough that she could smell the tobacco on his breath. He reached out and grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her flesh. Why don't you be nice? He leered. Maybe we can help you with your loneliness. Clara didn't think. She reacted. She jerked her arm back with all her strength, breaking his grip. She swung the barrel of the rifle up. She didn't aim at his chest. She wasn't a killer. But she aimed at the ground right beside his horse's front hooves. She pulled the trigger. Crack! The shot was deafening. A geyser of dirt exploded inches from the horse's leg. The animal reared, terrified, nearly unseating the rider. The other horses spooked, wheeling around. The rider fought to control his mount, cursing. He looked at Clara. She had levered the rifle, ejecting the spent shell and chambering a new round. She leveled it straight at his chest. The next one won't be in the dirt, she said. Her voice was steady, cold as the grave. The man stared at her. He saw the white-knuckled grip on the stock. He saw the desperation in her eyes. He realized she would pull the trigger. Crazy witch. He spat. He wheeled his horse around. Let's go, boys. They galloped off, their laughter trailing behind them, mocking and cruel. But they left. Clara stood there until they were gone. Then her knees gave way. She sank to the dirt, clutching the rifle, shaking so hard her teeth chattered. She was alone, truly alone, and the wolves were circling. Eli woke up to pain. It was a living thing, throbbing in his skull, radiating from his ribs. He was lying in the dirt. He tasted blood and dust. He rolled over, groaning. Barrett stood over him, looking down with a mixture of pity and disgust. You are a disappointment. Eli, Barrett said. Eli tried to sit up. His vision swam. One of his eyes was swollen shut. His ribs felt like broken glass. You can kill me, Eli mumbled through split lips. It won't stop it. I'm not going to kill you, Barrett said. That would be too easy, and it would make you a martyr to the widow. Barrett crouched down. "I want you to deliver a message. You go back to her. You tell her that this is what happens when you push me. And you tell her that if she doesn't sell, the next fire won't be in a stable. It will be the whole town." He stood up and kicked dirt onto Eli's legs. "Take care of the problem yourself. Eli, if you truly care about Dry Creek, if you truly care about her, make her sell or watch her burn." Barrett walked away. "Get him on his horse," he ordered his men, "and send him home." It was dark when Eli rode back into the ranch yard. He was barely conscious, clinging to the saddle horn. The horse, sensing home, had carried him the last 5 miles. Clara heard the hoofbeats. She ran out of the tent with the lantern. Eli? She saw him slump forward. She ran to the horse, grabbing the bridle. Eli slid from the saddle, his legs refusing to hold him. Clara caught him, buckling under his weight, and they collapsed together into the dust. "Eli! Oh, God! Eli!" She saw the blood on his face, the bruising, the way he wheezed when he breathed. "He hurt you," she whispered, horrified. I'm okay," Eli gasped. Clara helped him up, half dragging him to the fire pit. She sat him on the log. She ran to fetch the basin and the cloth. Her hands shook as she dipped the rag in the water. She began to wipe the blood from his face. She touched the swelling around his eye, the cut on his lip. "He did this," she said, her voice trembling with fury. "He did this because you went to him. I had to try," Eli whispered. He winced as she cleaned a deep gash on his forehead. Clara looked at him. In the flickering firelight, he looked broken. His shirt was torn, revealing the old burn scars on his chest and neck. The new bruises bloomed purple against the old white tissue. It was a map of violence. His whole life was written on his skin in pain. Clara felt a surge of emotion so strong it nearly knocked her over. It was rage at Barrett, yes, but it was also a profound, aching tenderness for this man who kept walking into the fire for her. "Why?" she asked softly. "Why do you keep doing this? You could have ridden away. You could have taken his money." Eli looked at her with his one good eye. "I used to think that was all I was," he rasped. "A gun, a fist, a thing to break other things. That was all I was good for." He reached out, his battered hand taking hers. "Then I met you," he said, "and you were so stubborn, so brave, standing in the ashes and refusing to leave. You made me want to be something else." Clara looked at their joined hands. His blood was on her fingers. She leaned in. She wanted to kiss the hurt away. She wanted to pull him into the tent and hide him from the world. The desire was a physical ache in her belly, but as she leaned closer, his fingers brushed the inside of her wrist. She froze. She saw the fire again. She saw Thomas. She saw the betrayal. She pulled her hand away. "I can't," she whispered. "I'm sorry. I can't." Eli let his hand drop. He nodded slowly. "I know." The rejection hung between them, heavy and sad. Suddenly, Eli lifted his head. He sniffed the air. Clara saw his eyes widen. "Smoke," he said. Clara turned. She looked toward the west. The horizon was glowing. A sullen, orange light pulsated against the black sky. It wasn't the sunset. It was night. "Another fire. It's the O'Malleys," Clara said, her voice hollow. "The homestead 3 miles west. They have children." "Barrett!" Eli growled. He stood up, swaying on his feet. He ignored his pain. He ignored his broken ribs. "We have to go," he said. "They rode hard. Clara on Daisy, Eli on his gelding." The wind whipped their faces. When they crested the ridge overlooking the O'Malley place, it was already too late. The house was fully engulfed. The roof had caved in. The flames roared into the night sky, throwing showers of sparks that danced with the stars. The family was gathered by the well. John O'Malley, his wife, and their 3 children. They were huddled together, watching their life turn to ash. Clara and Eli rode down. The heat was intense. John O'Malley was coughing, his face black with soot. He looked wild-eyed. "Did you see them?" John screamed at Eli. "Did you see them?" "See who?" Eli asked, dismounting painfully. "The riders!" John yelled. 3 of them. "I saw them on the ridge just before the smoke started." They were watching. He fell to his knees, weeping. They took it all. Everything. Sheriff Finch arrived 10 minutes later, riding with 2 deputies. He looked at the burning house, then at Eli's battered face, then at Clara. The sheriff took off his hat. He wiped his brow. "This ends," Finch said quietly. He looked at Eli. "You were right. Moran, he is not stopping. He is burning the whole valley." The townspeople began to arrive in wagons and buggies. They stood in a silent circle, watching the destruction. The fear was palpable, but beneath the fear, there was something else now. Anger. They looked at the O'Malley children, crying in their nightshirts. They looked at the fire, and they looked at Clara Hale, standing next to the scarred cowboy, both of them covered in dust and blood. Clara looked at the faces of her neighbors. She saw the doubt cracking. She saw the realization that silence would not save them. She made a decision. It settled on her shoulders like a heavy cloak, but it felt right. She walked over to Sheriff Finch. "I will testify," she said loudly, "so everyone can hear." Finch nodded. "And you, Moran?" Eli stepped up beside Clara. He stood tall, despite his injuries. "I will tell them everything," Eli said. "I will tell the judge about Wyoming. I will tell him about the orders. I will tell him I was an accomplice." Clara looked at him sharply. "Eli, if you do that, they will hang you, or send you to prison for 20 years. Eli looked at the fire. Then he looked at her. "It is the only way to nail him. Clara, my word against his is nothing. But a confession? A confession from one of his own men, admitting to the crimes and implicating him? The judge can't ignore that. He is offering his life." Clara realized. He is trading his future for my justice. The enormity of the sacrifice hit her. This man, who she had slapped and rejected, was willing to walk into a cell so she could walk free. "You don't have to do that," she whispered. "I do," Eli said. "I don't want to leave you burning." "Clara." They left the O'Malley place as dawn began to break. They stopped on the high ridge that overlooked the valley. The sun was coming up, turning the desert pale gold. From this vantage point, they could see the scars. There was the black smear of the O'Malley ranch. To the east, the blackened square of the Hale place. And further out, the faint trace of another homestead that had burned years ago. The land looked wounded, dark islands of char in a sea of pale grass. Clara sat on her horse, looking at the destruction. She felt a cold, hard strength rising in her. She was done being afraid. She was done being the victim. She looked at Eli. His face was swollen, his lips split, his body broken. But he sat straight in the saddle. "We are going to fight him." Clara said, "Yes," Eli said. "And when we are done," Clara said, looking him in the eye, "I won't let anyone else be left burning. Not the O'Malleys, not me." She paused, her voice softening. "And not you." Eli. Eli looked at her. He didn't believe her. He knew what the law did to men like him, but he appreciated the lie. "No matter the cost," he said. They turned their horses and rode back toward the ruins, 2 small figures against the dawn, riding toward the storm that was coming. The wind that scoured Dry Creek in the days leading up to the circuit judge's arrival was not a weather event. It was a mood. It moved through the town like a restless animal, rattling the loose boards of the boardwalks and driving grit into the eyes of anyone foolish enough to look up. It carried the taste of dust and the metallic tang of impending violence. People moved with a jagged, nervous energy. Conversations on the street corners were brief and hushed. Eyes darted toward the horizon, then back to the ground. The town felt strung tight, like a fence wire pulled past its breaking point, singing in the wind just before it snaps. Clara Hale moved through this tension with a singular, quiet purpose. She was no longer the ghost of the Hale Ranch. She was a woman assembling an army, however small and ragged it might be. She met John O'Malley behind the livery stable that was currently being rebuilt. The man looked 10 years older than he had a week ago. His face was still gray with the shock of losing his home, his hands restless. "I will talk," John said, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and rage. "I saw them. Mrs. Hale, I saw the riders on the ridge. I will tell the judge. You have to be sure. John, Clara said, gripping his arm. Barrett will have lawyers. He will try to twist your words. Let him try. John spat. My children are sleeping in a wagon because of him. I will swear on a stack of Bibles as high as the church steeple. Her second recruit was harder to find. Silas Vance was an old ranch hand who had ridden for the Cole brand 20 years ago, before arthritis and whiskey had crippled him. Clara found him in the alley behind the saloon, nursing a bottle of cheap rye. Silas, Clara said. The old man squinted up at her. Widow Hale. You are stirring up a hornet's nest. I am burning out the hornets. Silas, I need you to tell what you told me last winter, about the way Barrett expands his lines. Silas coughed, wiping his mouth with a stained sleeve. He will kill me. He is already killing this town, Clara said. You have nothing left to lose. Silas, but you can leave this world with a clean soul. Silas looked at the bottle, then at Clara. He nodded slowly. I reckon I can do that. Sheriff Finch was the final piece. He sat in his office, looking at the statements Clara had gathered. He looked weary, a man who had spent a lifetime taking the path of least resistance and finding that it only led to a cliff. This is a war. Clara, Finch said heavily. You know that? If we bring this to Judge Holloway, Barrett will throw everything he has at us. Let him. Clara said, Are you with us, Amos? Or are you going to let him burn the rest of us down? Finch picked up his badge, polishing it absently with his thumb. I am tired of the smell of smoke, he admitted. I will file the complaint, but we need Moran. We need his testimony to tie the knot, in the silence of the bunkhouse foundation. Eli Moran sat at a makeshift table made of an overturned crate. A lantern flickered beside him, casting long, jumping shadows against the night. He held a pencil in his right hand. His grip was awkward, hampered by the scar tissue that tightened the skin across his knuckles. He wrote slowly, pressing hard into the paper, forming each letter with clumsy, blocky precision. I, Eli Moran, being of sound mind. His hand cramped. He stopped, flexing the fingers. His jaw set in a line of pain. Writing was harder than digging post holes. It required him to pull the truth out of his gut and pin it to the page, black and undeniable. Clara stood in the doorway, watching him. She saw the sweat beading on his forehead. She saw the way he hesitated before writing the words arson and intimidation. He was writing his own death warrant. He was putting on paper the crimes that could hang him in Wyoming or send him to the territorial prison for the rest of his life. And he was doing it for her. He looked up and saw her. He didn't hide the paper. Is it done? She asked softly. Almost, Eli said. His voice was rough. I am putting down the dates, the names of the men I rode with, the orders Barrett gave us. Clara walked into the room. She placed a hand on his shoulder. The muscle beneath his shirt was rock hard with tension. You don't have to sign it. Eli, we have John. We have Silas. They are not enough, Eli said. He looked at the paper. This ties him to the fire. This ties him to the intent. Without this, he is just a man with bad luck and aggressive business practices. With this, he is a criminal. He bent his head and signed his name at the bottom. The pencil lead snapped on the final stroke. There, he said. He handed her the paper. Clara took it. It felt heavy, weighted with his freedom. She looked at the rough, labored handwriting, and her heart broke for him. He was damning his past to save her future. Barrett Cole did not wait for the gavel to fall. He was a man who understood power, and he felt his slipping. The whispers in town were growing louder. The way people looked at him had changed. The fear was still there, but the reverence was gone. He tightened his grip. On Tuesday, Clara went to the general store to buy flour. Mrs. Gable stood behind the counter, her face pale. I can't give you credit. Mrs. Hale, she whispered. I have always paid on time. Clara said, I know, but the bank called in our note. Mr. Cole owns the bank board. He said we can't carry high-risk accounts. Clara put the flour back. She understood. He was trying to starve her out. The rumors started next. Men in the saloon spoke loudly about Eli Moran being a wanted child killer from Dakota. They said he had robbed a payroll train. They said Clara was sheltering him not for protection, but because she had lost her mind and taken a murderer to her bed. It was a poison campaign, designed to isolate them before the judge arrived. Then came the night of the final fire. It was 2 nights before the hearing. The wind was howling out of the north, a dry, screaming gale that rattled the teeth. Clara and Eli were eating a cold supper in the tent. They didn't light a fire. The wind was too dangerous. Eli stopped chewing. He tilted his head. "Horses," he said. Clara listened. She heard nothing over the wind. Eli grabbed his rifle and bolted out of the tent. Clara followed him. They stood in the dark yard. The wind whipped Clara's hair across her face. "There," Eli pointed. "To the south, on the edge of the Hale property." A flicker of light. Then another. "They are at the old barn ruins," Eli said. "They are trying to burn what is left." "Why?" Clara shouted over the wind. "It is already destroyed." "Evidence," Eli yelled back, running toward the corral, the posts, the scorch marks. "If they burn it all to ash, there is nothing for the judge to see. And they are hoping to draw us out." They mounted the horses without saddles, grabbing only bridles and rifles. They rode hard, the horses' hooves drumming a frantic rhythm on the hard-packed earth. The glow ahead grew brighter. The wind was fanning the flames, driving them across the dry grass toward the creek bed. As they neared the ruins, a shot rang out. Ping! A bullet struck the ground near Daisy's hooves. "Get down!" Eli screamed. They slid from the horses, using the animals as cover. 3 men were positioned near the burning remains of the barn. They were silhouettes against the orange glare. They were firing blindly into the dark, suppressing any approach. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. She pressed her cheek against the stock of the rifle. This was not a warning shot. This was war. Eli moved to her left. "Stay here," he ordered. "Keep their heads down. I'm going to circle the flank." He disappeared into the shadows, moving low and fast like a wolf. Clara took a breath, steadied her aim, and fired. She didn't aim to kill. She aimed at the wood pile the men were using for cover. The wood splintered, and the men shouted, ducking lower. She fired again and again. The recoil bruised her shoulder, but the rhythm of it kept her from panicking. From the darkness on the left, chaos erupted. Eli hit the line. He didn't shoot. He tackled the nearest man, slamming him into the dirt. The gun flew from the man's hand. They rolled in the dust, punching and grappling. The other 2 men turned to fire at Eli, but Clara unleashed a rapid volley, forcing them back. The fire was growing. The wind was pushing it fast, wrapping around the perimeter. The dry sagebrush caught with a crackling roar. Suddenly, the world seemed to close in. The flames jumped the firebreak, encircling the combatants. Smoke billowed, thick and choking. In the swirling confusion, Clara saw a 4th figure. He was on horseback, separated from the others. He was holding a torch. It was Barrett Cole. He was shouting orders, his face twisted in a rictus of hate. "Burn it all! Leave nothing!" He saw Eli wrestling in the dirt. He saw Clara behind the log. Barrett spurred his horse forward, raising the torch. He intended to throw it into the heavy timber of the fallen house, to create an inferno that would consume them all. "Barrett!" Eli screamed, breaking free from his opponent. "Stop!" Barrett didn't stop. He wound up to throw. But the wind, the relentless, scouring wind of the high plains, made its judgment. As Barrett threw, a violent gust caught the torch. It didn't fly forward. It flared backward, a tongue of fire wrapping around Barrett's arm. The oil-soaked sleeve of his expensive coat caught instantly. Barrett screamed. The horse panicked, rearing up and throwing him. Barrett hit the ground hard. The fire spread across his back, feeding on the wool and the oil. He scrambled up, shrieking, batting at the flames that were eating him alive. The fighting stopped. The hired men froze, watching their boss turn into a pillar of fire. Eli scrambled to his feet. His instinct, the instinct of a man who had spent his life saving things from fire, kicked in. He ran toward Barrett, pulling off his own coat to smother the flames. "No!" Clara scrambled over the log. She ran to Eli and grabbed his arm. Jerking him back, Eli looked at her, wild-eyed. "He is burning. Let him burn," Clara said. Her voice was not loud, but it cut through the roar of the fire. Her face was illuminated by the flames, hard as granite. She held Eli back. She watched the man who had ordered the death of her husband and son writhe in the justice of his own making. Barrett's men finally broke their paralysis. They rushed forward, dragging their screaming boss away from the fire, rolling him in the dirt to extinguish the flames. They hauled him, smoking and moaning, toward the horses. They fled. They threw Barrett over a saddle and galloped into the night, leaving the fire to rage behind them. Sheriff Finch and a posse of townsfolk arrived 10 minutes later. They found Clara and Eli beating out the edges of the fire with saddle blankets, their faces blackened with soot, standing amidst the ruins of a battle that had finally burned itself out. The next day, Judge Holloway arrived. He rode into Dry Creek in a carriage covered in dust, a tall man with a face like a carved cliffside and eyes that missed nothing. He found a town that had been stripped of its illusions. The story of the night before had traveled like the fire itself. Everyone knew. Barrett Cole had tried to burn them out and had set himself ablaze. The aura of invincibility that had surrounded the cattle baron was gone, replaced by the smell of burnt wool and failure. The courthouse was a small, stifling room packed to the rafters. Every bench was full. People stood along the walls. The air was hot and smelled of sweat, tobacco, and fear. Clara sat at the plaintiff's table. She wore her best black dress. Her hands were folded on the table, still stained with the soot she couldn't scrub out of her pores. Eli sat beside her. He looked uncomfortable in a clean shirt Finch had lent him. He kept his eyes on the floor, his body tense, waiting for the blow he knew was coming. Sheriff Finch stood by the door, his shotgun in the crook of his arm. Judge Holloway banged his gavel. The sound was like a gunshot in the crowded room. "This court is in session," the judge boomed. "We are here to hear the complaint of Clara Hale against Barrett Cole regarding charges of arson, intimidation, and conspiracy." Barrett was brought in. He was a ruin of a man. Half his face and his entire right arm were heavily bandaged. He sat in a wheelchair, his breath rattling in his chest, but his good eye still burned with a cold, malevolent light. Clara was called first. She took the stand. She swore on the Bible. She looked out at the townspeople, the women who had shunned her, the men who had mocked her. She did not flinch. "Tell us what happened, Mrs. Hale," the judge said. Clara began. She spoke of the night 2 years ago. She spoke of the smell of kerosene. She spoke of Thomas's refusal to sell. She spoke of the threats, the letters, the stable fire, and the final attack on the ranch. Her voice broke when she mentioned Henry, but she did not stop. She let the pain bleed into the room, raw and undeniable. "He wanted the land," Clara said, looking directly at Barrett. "He wanted the water, and he decided that my family was just debris to be cleared away." When she stepped down, the room was silent. The judge called Eli Moran. Eli stood up. He walked to the stand with a heavy, limping gait. He did not look at the crowd. He looked at the judge. "State your name." The judge said, "Eli Moran, Mr. Moran. You have submitted a sworn statement. Do you stand by it?" "I do. Read it." The judge ordered. Eli picked up the paper. His hand trembled slightly. He began to read. He confessed to everything. He told the court about the jobs in Wyoming. He named the ranches they had burned. He named the families they had driven out. He described the tactics, the night raids, the oil, the intimidation. A collective inhalation sucked the air out of the room. The townspeople murmured. Some glared with hatred. Others looked away in shame. He was admitting to being a monster. Eli looked up. "But the night of the hail fire, I tried to stop it. I didn't know there was a child. When I found out, I went in." He held up his scarred hands. "I couldn't save them," he said quietly. "But I know who ordered the fire. It was Barrett Cole. He paid us $50 a man. He told us to make it burn hot." He looked at Barrett. "He told us that accidents happen to people who stand in the way of progress." Barrett's lawyer, a slick man from the Capitol, jumped up. "Objection! This man is a criminal, a confessed arsonist. His word is worth nothing." "Sit down," the judge snapped. The witnesses were called. John O'Malley, shaking but defiant, testified to seeing Barrett's men. Silas Vance, sober for the first time in years, corroborated the history of Barrett's tactics. Sheriff Finch took the stand and admitted he had ignored the signs because he was afraid of Barrett's power. It was a landslide of truth. Barrett was given a chance to speak. He tried to stand, winced, and sank back. "Lies," he rasped. "All lies. I am a businessman. I built this town. These people, they are jealous. They are weak. That woman is hysterical. And that man is a drifter looking for a payout." But his voice lacked its old power. He was a burnt, broken man, and the town saw him for what he was. Suddenly, one of Barrett's hired men, sitting in the front row, reached into his coat. He saw the way the wind was blowing. He saw the sheriff looking at him. Panic took over. He drew a pistol. "Gun!" Someone screamed. Eli didn't think. He moved. He vaulted over the railing of the witness stand. He tackled the gunman just as the weapon cleared the holster. The gun went off. Bang! Sending a bullet into the ceiling. Plaster rained down. The courtroom erupted. Women screamed. Men shouted. Chairs scraped and overturned. Eli slammed the gunman's head against the floor. Once, twice, until he stopped struggling. He wrenched the gun away and tossed it to the sheriff. "Order!" the judge roared, pounding his gavel until the handle nearly cracked. "Order in this court!" Sheriff Finch and his deputies moved in, securing the gunman and surrounding Barrett. The room slowly quieted, the adrenaline leaving everyone shaking. The judge looked at Eli, who was standing over the unconscious gunman, breathing hard. He looked at Barrett, who was cowering in his wheelchair. "I have heard enough," the judge said. His voice was cold steel. "Barrett Cole, you are hereby bound over for trial on charges of 3 counts of arson, 2 counts of murder, and conspiracy. You will be transported to the territorial capital under heavy guard." He turned to Eli. "Mr. Moran, you have confessed to serious crimes in other jurisdictions. I cannot ignore that." Clara stood up. "Your Honor, please, he saved us. He testified when he knew it would ruin him." The judge held up a hand. "However," the judge continued, "this court recognizes that without your testimony and your action here today, a great injustice would have continued, and you just saved this courtroom from further violence." He leaned forward. "I am remanding you to the custody of the sheriff. I will forward your confession to the authorities in Wyoming. It will be up to them to decide if they wish to pursue extradition, but I will include a strong recommendation for leniency based on your cooperation and your actions here." He paused. "Until they come for you, you are free to remain in Dry Creek, provided you stay out of trouble." Eli nodded slowly. "Thank you, Your Honor." The townspeople filed out of the courthouse in a daze. They gathered in small knots on the dusty street, talking in hushed tones. Some shook their heads. "It would have been better to leave it be," they muttered. "Now we have no bank and a criminal living among us." But others looked at Clara Hale with new eyes. They saw the steel in her spine. They saw a woman who had faced down the devil and won. Sheriff Finch escorted Barrett to the jail wagon. Barrett looked small, shriveled by pain and defeat. He didn't look at Clara as he was loaded in. Clara and Eli stood on the steps of the courthouse. The sun was high and fierce. The wind blew dust across their boots. But for the first time in years, the air felt clean. It wasn't a parade. There were no cheers. They had won. But the cost was etched into their faces. Clara had lost her anonymity and her peace. Eli had lost his freedom to run. He was now tethered to the law, waiting for a judgment from a past he couldn't escape. Clara looked at Eli. He looked tired, old, and scarred. But he was standing. "What now?" she asked. Eli watched the wagon carrying Barrett disappear down the road. "Now we'd wait," he said. "We wait to see if Wyoming wants me, and if they do, then I go," Eli said. Clara reached out and took his hand. She didn't care who saw. She didn't care about the whispers. "We will deal with that when it comes." she said firmly. "Until then, we have a fence to finish." Eli looked at her. A faint, weary smile touched his lips. "Yes, ma'am," he said, "we do." They walked down the steps together, hand in hand, stepping into the uncertainty of the rest of their lives. The wind pushed at their backs, not holding them back, but urging them forward. The rain came 3 weeks after the trial. It did not come as a storm, violent and demanding, but as a gentle, steady soaking that washed the dust from the air and turned the hard-packed earth a deep, rich brown. It fell for 2 days, a rare mercy on the high plains, and when the clouds finally broke, the scent of the world had changed. It no longer smelled of ash and old fear. It smelled of wet sage, damp soil, and the sharp, clean tang of possibility. Around the ruins of the Hale Ranch, the land began to answer the water. Green shoots of buffalo grass pushed up through the black scars of the burn. Wildflowers, dormant for years under the drought, unfolded their petals in defiant purples and yellows against the gray of the charred timber. The landscape was healing, covering its wounds with new life, and the town of Dry Creek began to do the same. Barrett Cole was gone. He had been transported under heavy guard to the territorial capital, a broken man in a wagon, leaving behind an empire that crumbled as soon as his iron grip was removed, without his shadow stretching across the valley. The people of Dry Creek straightened their backs. The fear that had kept them silent evaporated like mist in the morning sun. His hired men drifted away, seeking easier work in places where the law was softer, and those who stayed found that honest labor paid a wage that let a man sleep at night. Clara Hale felt the shift in the way the bell above the general store door rang when she entered. It was no longer a summons to judgment. Mrs. Gable, who had once refused her credit, now greeted her with a flushed, apologetic warmth, pressing extra ribbon into her hand and refusing payment. "I was afraid." "Clara, Mrs." Gable whispered one afternoon while measuring calico. "We were all so afraid. I am sorry I let that fear make me cruel." Clara accepted the apology with a nod. She understood fear. She knew how it could hollow a person out until there was nothing left but self-preservation. Her business returned, slowly at first, then in a rush. Women who had shunned her came back, bringing torn dresses and hush-voiced confessions. They looked at her differently now. She was not just the seamstress or the widow. She was the woman who had stood in the fire and refused to burn. Her courage had given them permission to question their own cowardice, and in her presence, they stood a little taller. One afternoon, a clerk from the judge's office rode out to the ranch. He carried a leather satchel and a respectful demeanor. "Mrs. Hale," he said, dismounting. "I have the documents regarding the title clearing. With Mr. Cole's claims voided and his assets seized for restitution. The lien on your water rights is dissolved." He handed her a stack of papers. They were thick, official parchment, tied with a red string. Clara held them in her hands. They felt heavier than iron. They were the weight of Thomas's dream, the weight of Henry's future, finally secured. She owned the ashes, and she owned the green grass growing through them. She looked toward the bunkhouse foundation, where Eli Moran was repairing a bridle. He didn't look up. He kept his head down, working with that focused, quiet intensity that had become the rhythm of her days. Eli lived in a strange, uneasy limbo. He was free, for now. The judge had sent his confession to Wyoming, but the telegraph lines were slow, and the wheels of justice in the territories turned at their own pace. He expected the sheriff to ride out any day with shackles. He expected the town to run him out with pitchforks. Instead, he found a wary tolerance. Men nodded to him in the street, short, sharp nods that acknowledged his strength if not his character. He was the man who had burned houses. Yes, but he was also the man who had tackled a gunman in a crowded courtroom to save a judge. He was a paradox, a wolf who had turned on the pack to save the sheep, and Dry Creek didn't quite know what to do with him. So Eli stayed on the edge, working the Hale land, waiting for the other boot to drop. He slept in the bunkhouse, ate on the porch, and tried to make himself invisible. He felt the weight of Clara's gratitude like a stone around his neck. He didn't know how to be a hero. He only knew how to be a drifter, and the urge to run was a constant, itching heat under his skin. The evening the sky turned the color of a bruise healing into gold. Clara walked out to the bunkhouse to call Eli for supper. The wind was calm, the air cooling rapidly as the sun dipped below the mesas. She found the door open. Inside, Eli was not resting. He was packing. His saddlebags were thrown over the crate he used as a table. He was rolling his spare shirt, shoving it deep into the leather pouch. His few possessions, a razor, a box of cartridges, a tin of tobacco, were already cleared from the shelf. Clara stopped in the doorway. The breath left her lungs in a rush, as if she had been struck. "What are you doing?" she asked. Eli froze. He didn't turn around immediately. He finished buckling the strap on the bag before he faced her. "It is time." "Clara," he said. "Time for what? To run? To go?" he corrected. "The fence is finished. The cattle are secure. You have the deed. You don't need me anymore." Clara stepped into the room. The space was small, smelling of leather and the sagebrush soap he used. "I didn't say I didn't need you," she said, her voice tight. Eli sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Clara, look at this. Look at me. I am a waiting target. Every day I stay here. I put a mark on you. People are starting to talk again. Not about Barrett, but about us, about the widow and the outlaw. Let them talk," Clara snapped. "I won't let them drag you down," Eli said, his voice rising. "You have your reputation back. You have your life back. You deserve a clean start. You deserve a man who can walk into church without the priest gripping the pulpit in fear. You deserve better than a burnt-out hired gun waiting for the hangman." He picked up his saddlebags and moved toward the door. "I am riding out tonight. It is better this way." Clara moved faster than he expected. She stepped in front of the door, blocking his path. Her hands were balled into fists at her sides. Her eyes were blazing with a fire that had nothing to do with destruction. "You coward," she whispered. Eli flinched. "I am trying to protect you. You are trying to run," Clara shouted. "You are doing what you always do. When it gets hard, when it gets real, you saddle a horse and you disappear. You ran from Wyoming. You ran from the memories of the fire. And now you are running from me." "I am not running from you," Eli yelled back, the control finally snapping. "I am running for you. Do you think this is easy? Do you think I want to leave? Then stay. I can't." Eli dropped the bags. The crash was loud in the small room. "I look at you and I see the scars on your soul that I helped put there. I look at this land and I see the smoke. I am poisoned. Clara, I am ash. I will only make you dirty." Clara stepped closer. She shoved him. It was a hard, physical push against his chest. "Stop deciding for me," she cried. "Stop telling me what I deserve. I have spent 2 years letting men tell me what was good for me. Barrett told me selling was good for me. The sheriff told me silence was good for me. And now you are telling me that being alone is good for me?" She shoved him again. Tears were streaming down her face now, cutting tracks through the dust on her cheeks. "I can't do it again. Eli, I can't stand on this ridge and watch another person leave me. I can't walk into that empty house and listen to the wind howl and know that you are out there somewhere, drifting like a ghost." Her voice cracked, breaking into a sob. "You promised, that first night, you promised you wouldn't leave me burning. If you walk out that door, you are striking the match yourself." Eli looked at her. He saw the raw, open wound of her heart. He saw the terror in her eyes, not terror of the fire, but terror of the emptiness. He realized then that his penance was not in leaving. His penance was in the staying. It was in the daily, terrifying act of being known. "I am scared. Clara," he whispered, "I am scared I will break you." "You won't break me," Clara said, her voice dropping to a fierce whisper. "We are already broken. Eli, that is how the light gets in." She reached out and grabbed the front of his shirt. Her knuckles brushed the old burn scars on his chest. "Don't go, please." Eli looked at her hands on him. He looked at her face, upturned and pleading, the walls he had built around his guilt. The fortress of shame he had lived in for 5 years crumbled. He dropped his head. He let out a shuddering breath that sounded like a surrender. Okay, he breathed. Okay. He stepped closer. He didn't pull away this time. He raised his hands, hesitating for a fraction of a second, and then cupped her face. His palms were rough, calloused, scarred maps of his history. Clara leaned into his touch. She closed her eyes. He kissed her. It was not like the kiss in the tent, desperate and angry. This kiss was slow. It was deliberate. It was a question asked and answered in the same breath. It tasted of salt from her tears and the metallic tang of the evening air. Eli kissed her as if she were made of glass, as if he were terrified of shattering her. But Clara kissed him back with a strength that grounded him. She wound her arms around his neck, pulling him down, anchoring him to the earth. The heat rose between them. Not the destructive heat of a wildfire, but the steady, radiating warmth of a hearth. It was the heat of survival. They moved together into the shadows of the room. The saddlebags lay forgotten on the floor. Outside, the crickets began to sing in the cooling grass, and the wind whispered through the cracks in the walls. But for the first time, neither of them was listening to the wind. They were listening to the beat of each other's hearts, loud and terrified, and alive. Later, the moon rose high and white, casting a pale square of light through the open door. They lay on the narrow bunk, tangled together under a wool blanket. Clara rested her head on Eli's chest. She could hear the steady thrum of his heartbeat beneath her ear. She traced the line of the scar that ran down his neck with her finger. He didn't flinch. He lay still, one arm wrapped around her, his hand resting protectively on her shoulder. "I still talk to them," Clara said softly into the dark. Eli didn't ask who. He knew. Thomas and Henry. She continued. "Sometimes, when I am in the garden, or when the light hits the creek just right, I talk to them. I tell them about the day." Eli tightened his hold on her slightly. "Do you tell them about me?" "Yes." Eli was silent for a long moment. "What do they say?" Clara lifted her head to look at him. His face was shadowed, but she could see the tension in his jaw. "They don't say anything. Eli, they are at peace. But I tell them that I am safe. I tell them that I am not alone." She rested her chin on his chest. "My heart is not a small room. Eli, it is a house with many rooms. Loving them doesn't mean I have to close the door on you, and loving you doesn't mean I have forgotten them. They are part of the foundation. You are the roof that keeps the rain out." Eli closed his eyes. Tears leaked from the corners, hot and silent. "I still hear the fire," he confessed, his voice rough with emotion. "When I close my eyes, I hear the roar. I worry that I will never be clean enough for you. I worry that the soot is in my blood." Clara reached up and wiped the tear from his cheek. "I don't need you to be clean. Eli, I need you to be here. I need you honest. The rain washed the land, but the scars are still there. The grass grows anyway." She kissed the scar on his neck. "We grow anyway." Eli let out a long, ragged sigh. It was the sound of a burden being set down after 1,000 miles. "I'm here," he whispered. "I'm not running." The weeks turned into months, and the season turned. Summer burned itself out into a golden autumn. They rebuilt. It was slow work, done with hand tools and sweat. But the ranch began to rise from the ashes. They cleared the rubble of the main house. They decided not to build on the old foundation. That ground belonged to the past. Instead, they laid new stones 50 yards to the west, on a rise that overlooked the creek. They worked side by side, under the relentless midday sun. Eli dug post holes for the new pasture fence. He worked without a shirt, his scars exposed to the air and the light. He swung the post hole digger with a rhythm. Chunk, twist, lift. Clara followed him, placing the cedar stakes into the holes. She wiped sweat from her forehead with the back of her wrist, leaving a streak of dirt. "That one is crooked," she teased, pointing to a post that leaned slightly to the left. Eli leaned on the digger, wiping his face. "It is not crooked. The earth is crooked." "I am just following the contour." Clara laughed. It was a bright, genuine sound that carried across the dry ground. It is leaning. Eli Moran, just admit it. Eli grinned at her, a flash of white teeth in a dusty face. Maybe I made it lean so you would have to stand closer to hold it straight. Clara rolled her eyes, but she stepped closer, wrapping her hands around the rough wood. Is that better? Much better, Eli said softly, his eyes lingering on her face. In the evenings, the domestic quiet was a balm. Clara sat in the rocking chair on the porch of the half-finished house, stitching curtains from yellow gingham. She watched through the window frame as Eli stood in the corral. He was with the neighbor's boy, the youngest O'Malley, who had come over to help with the horses. The boy was skittish, still traumatized by his own house fire, but he looked at Eli with hero worship. Eli was teaching him to saddle Daisy. He moved with infinite patience, his large, scarred hands guiding the boy's small fingers over the buckles. He spoke low and encouragingly. Clara saw the boy laugh, and she saw Eli smile back. It was a moment of pure grace, the man who thought he was a monster teaching a child how to be gentle. They ate their meals on a crude bench under the vast, star-filled sky. The wind was gentler now, carrying the smell of wood smoke from their own chimney and the scent of curing hay. One night, deep in the darkness of November, the wind shifted. It blew smoke down the chimney, filling the small temporary cabin with a sharp, acrid smell. Clara bolted upright in bed. Her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The smell triggered the panic instantly. She was back in the burning house. She was back in the stable. She was trapping, choking. Fire! She gasped, scrambling to get out of the blankets. Eli was awake instantly. He didn't panic. He reached out and grabbed her arms, pulling her back from the edge of hysteria. Clara, Clara, look at me. No, it's burning. It's the stove, Eli said, his voice calm and grounding. It is just a downdraft. Listen to me. It is the stove. He held her firmly, anchoring her body with his own. Breathe, he commanded gently. Smell it. It is hickory wood. It is contained. Clara gasped, fighting for air. She focused on his voice. She focused on the solid warmth of his hands. She inhaled. He was right. It wasn't the chemical smell of kerosene. It was just wood smoke. She collapsed against him, shaking. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry, Eli whispered, stroking her hair. The fire is inside the iron. Clara, it is working for us. It is keeping us warm. It is under our control. He held her until her breathing slowed, rocking her slightly. Not all fire destroys, he murmured. Some fire saves. The distinction settled in her chest, a powerful metaphor for the life they were building. They were playing with fire every day, the fire of their pasts, the fire of their love. But they had learned how to tend the hearth. On the morning of the first frost, exactly 1 year after the stable fire, they walked up to the high ridge above the ranch. The dawn was breaking, washing the plains in a light so pale and pure it looked like milk. The frost coated the sagebrush in silver. Below them, the ranch was waking up. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney of the new, small cabin. The horses were grazing in the fenced pasture. The scars of the old fire were still there, black patches on the earth, but they were broken up by the gray-green of winter wheat and the gold of the dormant grass. Clara shivered in the cool air. She wrapped her shawl tighter. She remembered standing here with a heart full of ash. She remembered the night outside the burning stable, grabbing a stranger's coat and begging him to save her. I asked you not to leave me burning, she said softly. Eli looked at her. He stood with his hands in his coat pockets, looking out over the land he had helped reclaim. I remember, he said. I meant it differently then. Clara said, I meant the grief. I meant the memory of the flames. She turned to face him. Her eyes were clear, reflecting the morning light. Now, when I say it, I mean don't leave me alone with the weight of living. Don't leave me to face the quiet. Eli took his hand out of his pocket. He reached out and pulled her collar up against the wind. I am done running. Clara, he said. His voice was rough, but it was solid. It was like a fence post driven deep into the bedrock, immovable and true. Wyoming hasn't come for me. Maybe they never will, but even if they do, I will come back. Whatever storms come, whatever fires start, I will face them at your side." He offered her his hand. It was scarred, imperfect, and strong. Clara took it. "Shall we go home?" she asked. "Let's go home," Eli said. They turned and walked back down the slope, their boots crunching on the frost-covered ground. The sun crested the horizon, flooding the valley with light, chasing the last of the shadows away. The landscape around them was still harsh. The wind still bit. The mountain still loomed, and the dust still waited, but they walked hand in hand, a united front against the world. Their love was not a fairy tale. It was forged in tragedy, tested by prejudice, and scarred by fire, but it burned steady and true, a flame that warmed instead of devoured, proof that even in a world built on loss, something enduring could rise from the ashes. Thank you for listening to the story of Clara and Eli in Please Don't Leave Me Burning. It has been a journey through the smoke and dust of the American West, exploring how love can grow even in the most scorched earth. I would love to hear from you. Please comment below and tell me where you are listening from. It is always fascinating to see how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this tale, please consider subscribing to From Wild West for more stories of grit, survival, and romance on the frontier. Share your thoughts in the comments. Did you think Eli would stay? Do you think they found peace? I look forward to reading your insights. Until next time, keep your fires bright and your fences strong.